Oh yeah, can you hear me? Is my sound coming in fine? Perfect. All good stuff. Yeah, cool. Thanks very much for inviting me on, and yeah, it's certainly an interesting topic, and I think it certainly kind of links into a lot of stuff that you've been talking about in your Substack articles and your essays, and even kind of some of the stuff that I've been kind of talking about or putting out for the past while. So yeah, really happy that you invited me on, and yeah, very looking forward to talking about the stuff. Sorry to interject there. The chat, a few people are saying they can't hear you, but they can hear me.
Hello, is that better? That probably is better now, is it? Okay.
Can you hear them now, chat?
Hello, hello, hello. Can everyone hear me? Yes, they can.
Yeah,
Oh my god, I'm
they
sorry.
can. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These are the I can't these you can have these are the sound issues we've been having. I've been trying to avoid an echo and I can't get rid of it. But regardless, I'll briefly lead us through here. So we're going to be using this concept of TFR. It's used in all economic planning, and this will be feeding into the reports that we're going to be analyzing tonight. They're based on demographics, the future plans for the next 40 years. It's a very globalized measure, basically. And in every Western country and in Asia, it's in decline. And so here's the falling demographics fertility rate, basically, of Ireland since 1950. We had very high fertility up until the 70s and 80s, basically. And in the 90s, we start to really go down. A fertility rate of about 2.1 is considered normal and replacing itself. But you want a little bit more, ideally. And so we're in a pretty bad situation. You can see we picked up there in the just around the Troika era, but then it fell off rapidly after that point, and only for immigration basically since around 2016 or so onwards. That's been basically the main driver of population growth. Now, there's lots of statistics here. Um, you can see the number of births between 2007 2021, that's in decline. Um, and of course, yeah, there's all kinds of statistics here. And women are having children later in life and everything. But regardless, this TFR fertility rate is very important. And the UN, of course, famously wrote a report about population replacement in the early 2000s, basically, which we were all called conspiracy theorists for citing, but which actually centers around this TFR statistic. Um, and so this was all set up basically to try and replace the declining population with migration. And that's basically what's been going on. And as we're going to kind of show tonight, that is the plan for the future. There is no real plan outside of trying to maintain immigration, manage the negative consequences, and maintain social infrastructures like the civil service, public service, and so on. So population replacement is a real concept, and that's the actual report there, replacement migration from the UN Population Division. Okay, and so in 2018, of course, we had the famous Project Ireland 2040, and if anyone was kind of watching what was going on online, then there was a famous video put out by Stefan Molyneux, who I believe has Irish ancestry, and he did like an hour or two kind of just going through that report, and it went kind of viral, and people were asking like, what's going on with Ireland, why are they talking about replacing their population? And of course the media came out and said this, oh, it's not, no one says anything about replacing the population. But the only way, if you understand the actual demographic situation and the immigration situation, the only way that you can get an extra million people, which is what they predict will be in the country in the next 20 or 30 years, is through immigration. So this is a very mainstay of our current economic planning. Um, so I'll just switch now over. Okay, so this particular set of reports that we're going to talk about tonight originates with this thing called the Commission on Taxation and Welfare, which was launched by Pascal O'Donoghue in 2022. And it's all on the government website, basically. All the members are there. They're all academics or Quango heads. The civil society people are represented. And these are basically the stakeholders in this whole system. And these are people charged with basically fleshing out long-term strategy on this commission. And they produced one report called the Foundations for the Future, which is basically a list of suggestions for improving the kind of fiscal economic situation moving forward. We're not going to talk about that tonight, but that's basically more to do with policies directly to do with taxation. But this brings us to the current year. So this is the Irish Times summarizing the one of the reports that was released here in September by this commission. And so it says the state's population could hit 7.6 million in 4 decades, department estimates. And so the state's population could grow as part of a scenario analysis that was conducted. So they conducted about 2,000 scenarios, basically. And this whole idea of scenario planning goes back to this guy called Herman Kahn, who was working with the Rand Corporation and Pierre Wack at the Shell Oil Company in the 70s. And basically, they made scenario planning the mainstay of. I have it here actually. There's Herman Kahn. So he's the guy that's actually in the movie Doctor Strangelove. He's the character Doctor Strangelove is based on this guy, and he was a founding member of the Hudson Institute, and he's a futurist. So he came up with this idea of scenarios, basically. And so people would kind of war game out all these different scenarios about what might happen in the future. And they'd kind of use that as a tool to kind of work out what could happen, what's most likely to happen, and kind of see different scenarios, basically, as he calls it, about what the future could hold. And this feeds into long-term planning. So I read about this guy and Pierre Wack years ago, and they make an interesting stream actually in their own right. But like it's all about how like that was how Shell gained an advantage basically leading up to the oil crisis in the 70s. They were thinking way ahead of the competition. So scenario planning is now a part of government policy for a long time as well. And a lot of governments liaise with institutions like management consultancies like McKinsey or Accenture, and are specialist uh, advisors basically, and they plan ahead. So the Irish government is thinking deeply about how they're going to kind of keep the show on the road. And so the scenario here is in a central scenario, which assumes net inward migration ranges between 35 to 40,000 annually. The population will reach 6.7 million in 2065. In a high growth scenario where net migration is assumed to be higher, between 53 to 58,000 annually, the population climbs to 7.79 million. Um, okay, and so some graph there kind of showing the different scenarios and how they might plan out. Um, Interestingly, the TFR statistics of this group is actually lower than the CSO. They're actually projecting that it's going to settle somewhere around 1.5, which is way below replacement. And yes, they say it could even go lower. It could go down to 1.3 potentially. That's kind of where Italy and places like that are now. And so their sole concern really mainly is economic growth. And so the kind of conclusions of these reports is that economic growth is going to slow down no matter what we do. The population is going to age. There's immigration is not really going to fix that long term. They think it can slow it down, and these reports that we're going to discuss are coming up with very vague suggestions. Really, there's themes like deglobalization, the impact of the whole globalization '90s project getting unwound, and we kind of go to a more divided world and so on. So yeah, we'll leave it at that one for now. So here is Pascal Donoghue basically and introducing the demographic report. So there's two reports. This one here, Future 40, Ireland's demographic outlook, trends and scenarios for the next 40 years. And then there's this other one. This is economic report. So it's called Future 40, a fiscal and economic outlook to 2065. And that's produced. That was just this month, a couple of days ago. And interestingly, actually, I may as well mention this now. The economic formula, for want of a better expression, that they're using or model is called the Solo growth model. And I'll introduce this, and I'll let last through Gael say a little bit then, because I've waffled on too long here. But basically, this is a neoclassical model of economic growth that seeks to explain long term economic growth by looking at capital accumulation, labor or population growth, and increases in productivity, notably technological progress. And so these two economists basically came up with this in the 50s, I believe. And these are the four components of the formula. So you have capital accumulation, production function, capital accumulation, labor growth, and technological progress. So there's a general running through the kind of modern Western kind of neo-lib project is this idea that we can kind of use technology to kind of leap ahead of these kinds of problems of demographic slowdown, aging population. And there's a kind of a blank slate kind of idea going back to kind of Enlightenment idealism that if we just get bodies in here, it'll be fine. We can kind of allay the worst effects of this. Um, what do you feel about this model, last result?
Yeah, well, I suppose from a few different points, just to kind of before I kind of get into what you're talking about there with the solo growth model. The thing is with all this kind of stuff about like, why they why increased immigration is the kind of way forward from an economic point of view is maybe just a way to kind of like conceptualize this, right? The main the financial system's money supply essentially, for lack of a better phrase, originates as debt, right? So, for example, like if we have something like bondholders, right? Bondholders will give the money to the government, but they want a return. They want an interest, an ROI on that back, right? So, in order to pay back bonds, the government has to generate that in terms of economic output, plus that additional amount. So you have this kind of cycle in the financial system of like continued growth, but also you have the system of whereby people are not having children. You have less and less of an ability for your society to pay off the debt. And so if you're not having kids, the only option then from that economic framework or frame of mind is the immigration part. And this has been kind of, I think also it hasn't really been kind of discussed as much how this has also changed as well in light of like innovations in terms of transport, like, container ships and like long distance trucks and supply chain optimization. This all kind of like contributed to that. But ultimately, it kind of feeds into that like, and one of the things I was going to get into in a bit is the idea that like if you take a look at like previous Irish economic reports, like if you go back to the Telesis report that was recommended that Charlie Haughey took up in the 80s, right? If you take a read through that report is like it's incredible reading it today. Like it's basically it goes through the fact of like how we need to maximize Irish industries, indigenous firms, and how some of the attracting firm ideology from Whitaker back in the 50s and the 60s didn't really work as well. And it's fascinating to read it on a number of different levels, not only just because of that, but because like there is actually some bit of a vision or a focus. And one of the things reading this kind of future 40 thing, I don't know what I'll get to the solo growth thing in a second, but what really did strike me is that how kind of empty it is.
Mm.
Like there's no like, I mean, and it goes back to the kind of solo group model thing. You have the thing up there, total production output and all of that. And I'd be interested to kind of hear what you kind of think of this and the way that like all the stuff you've kind of written on kind of Gnosticism and the Enlightenment and the kind of the different perception of how the world works, how reality works, all of that feeds into it. Because for me anyway, economics is a lot of different things. It's not just like, equation GDP line go up. It's people's ability to function in communities. And there's even other ways like you can get into it. I mean, should there be kind of in terms of economics things like, art or, you know, um, cultural power and things like that. This stuff can't be quantified very easily, but that the the relentless kind of need to just like have everything in numbers, like that report, the
Yeah.
Future 40 thing, like it goes through all these scenarios, like 2,000 scenarios, and a lot of them are just kind of put your finger up in the air, kind
I
of half
think
mad
that is
crazy stuff.
exactly what you're kind of getting at there is like it you can just as long as there's data that can be assembled, it doesn't really matter. Like your opinion has legitimacy. This is the kind of world we live in now where ideas that cannot be reduced basically to some like equation or a number. They talk about like global happiness and this kind of metric. Oh, everyone in Sweden is the most happy country in the world and all this kind of stuff. Like a lot of this stuff is basically bullshit.
Yeah,
And when it comes down to it, like really, because it doesn't take account or it can't take account for these kinds of intangible things like community, authentic family, authentic community, these kinds of things have no way to be measured. So they don't exist in terms of economics. And so I'm a skeptic of having economists as the sole planners of any society. I think it's an incredibly narrow way of looking at the world, basically. Not that it doesn't have utility, but it's a very narrow way of looking at the world.
yeah, exactly. And even other ways from their own kind of perception of it, they're not even kind of, I would almost in a sense kind of optimizing it or doing it properly. So what I mean by that is, when I was kind of reading through the report, there was a surprising lack of any kind of idea in terms of like how do we keep young Irish people at home? Because even from a kind of a sort of maximizing GDP point of view, like, a native Irish population who know the culture, who know people who are the culture, basically, from an economic productivity point of view, again, using their own kind of constraints, which is obviously a bit not the case, right? But even then, it doesn't really like, there's nothing in terms of like, trying to attract Indigenous Irish back, or like there's a section in their report where they talk about how for a lot of high skilled immigrants, high skilled workers, the turnover rate is actually quite high. They only stay here for a few years and then they go. And it's kind of brushed off. There's actually a really funny, almost darkly funny line after that where they kind of say like, "Yeah, we actually haven't looked into why they leave, but they just leave." So you're building
Yeah.
out this report as a foundation, and that's another thing, that there's a lot of priors in there which are kind of like just believed off the bat, but you're kind of reading it and you're kind of going, hold on here, there's something a bit more going on here. Like I mean, like it really is just the whole thing is just narrowed down to kind of how can we deal with pensions, um,
Housing.
housing.
Pensions,
Yeah,
housing, healthcare, and dealing with deglobalization and AI. And basically, when they discuss AI and technology, they're basically saying, "Well, we don't really know because they don't know." And you know, there's no real suggestion. There's no real policy here other than the concrete things you can take from it is we have to keep immigration managed based like it is, even though we're going to slow down in a couple of decades anyway, no matter what we do. And they talk about the main driver, the main type of immigration coming in is actually family reunification in every
yeah,
scenario, basically. And you're kind of going, well, is that grandparents, is that extended family members with all kinds of ailments and illnesses? Like, I see no specifics on any of this data. Like, it's just a general. Well, it's driven by people coming from the connected families, and that's their right. But there's no analysis of whether that's economically beneficial. I couldn't imagine it being economically beneficial to be pulling people in like that, because you have these enormous extended families basically coming in. We've seen this in the hospitals, like people, old people coming in from all over the world now, like, and they're getting healthcare. I mean,
yeah,
it's like, yeah, you're saying there's no meat to any of this. There's a lot of buzzwords. They're talking about, the effect of more isolationism, EU expansion. I mean, they're talking about another, half a dozen or more countries coming into the EU by 2035. That's likely to happen. Within 20 years, you'll have Turkey in the EU. There's all this kind of stuff going in, and all they double down on at the end of it, and it's just they just say, we need to keep in with Europe because it's our big export market. And you're kind of going, well, if we have to have an open border to a few 100 million people, mainly who will be Muslims.
hmm,
I mean, is this really economically beneficial? Is it worth it? Like, is it really worth it? Like, what kind of country will it be if that happens?
yeah, yeah, exactly. Like they don't kind of zoom in on it, even from their kind of own end. I mean, for example, like again, just like that solo growth model thing, there's a difference between, you know, a guy who's here as a doctor or whatever. And I know the argument kind of like, that's always kind of rolled out there, the health service would collapse, which, to be honest, the way it's gone, probably would actually. No, it would actually.
Yeah.
But, there's a difference between that guy from an economic utility point of view and, you know, um, some guy who's been kind of unemployed and, like you were saying, the family reunification thing, like there's nothing even kind of on top of that. Like there's just a real, it's kind of rationalization upon rationalization. And the first level is that like people are just interchangeable and you can't talk about the differences, that someone might add to an economy. But
Yeah, immigration is seen as some absolutely natural thing that's just going to happen.
yeah,
Like, governments are just completely helpless. Can't do anything about it. We just have to quote unquote manage it. Now, like, what does that mean? Like, the only reason people were able to come here from like the Baltic states in Europe and all was because they became part of the European Union, and we decided to take them in as economic migrants immediately, which most countries didn't even do. Like, that was a policy choice. Like, they said in that early 2000s when that was happening, that there'd only be maybe a few thousand people, and I think we ended up with, like, was it 500,000 or it was something crazy that came in. It was hundreds of thousands anyway, and
mm,
that wasn't really planned for. And at every point in this report, they mention repeatedly government projections on immigration have always undershot. what what happened,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
you're kind of going, well,
yeah,
this is your report outlining like what's likely to happen. So does that mean I have to take the high scenario as being the most likely? Like, are we going to get massive? Because the way I see it, that's my takeaway. Like, I see no legislative or even like rhetorical uh, hints that they're going to change tack and learn any of these lessons at any point. So I have to assume that immigration is going to continue very radically and all of these things are going to deteriorate. They even say the health service is likely to get more and more challenging over time, even with the immigration. So I find myself looking like overall and saying, well, what are we even doing this for? Like why are we bringing in all of these people if we're going to still have to deal with this?
yeah, yeah, exactly. And even in terms of like kind of potential kind of issues that would be coming down the line in terms of like even stuff like housing, I don't think they kind of get into as much, and they are going to become issues. And one of them increasingly, I think, is, for example, as a lot of people get older and older, nursing homes become more and more of a thing. And I have just bear with me one second.
Will
I
I share
have,
your screen?
yeah, if you could, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
So I have it here somewhere. Here we go.
Yeah, you're up there. Yeah,
Can you see it there?
yeah, it's a little bit small, but I think it's fine.
Yeah, so basically, like, one of the things that could be coming down the line, or is actually, if we is that as people get older, nursing homes become more of a thing, right? If you take a look at the price of a nursing home, putting someone in there, it's extremely expensive. And one of the things that compounds that is the fact that, like, because people have less and less kids, there's less and less ways or amenities to kind of provide for this. So what they've done, right, if they is that they've set up this thing called the Fair Deal Scheme. And the Deal Scheme works in terms of like putting forward some of your assets into paying off nursing home expenses, right? The issue is because the price is going to be so high, and because a lot of people are just not going to have that money, there is going to be a possibility, I think, of like a lot of houses being sold off to provide the capital for people to be put in these nursing homes, right? And if you start doing that, that means that, like, on top of like some of the infrastructural issues that they're running into right now, I mean, there's an Irish Water report about like how the Greater Dublin area, if they don't get another wastewater plant, I think in the next 3 years, basically building in Dublin is just going to stop.
Mm.
So on top of that stuff, there are these kind of issues as well,
Like
which
those are
I do.
hard barriers. You can't just bullshit your way past having no infrastructure to actually build houses. So we've actually they've ran so radically towards the immigration pump model that they've actually ran the wheels off of it, and now we're at the very end, like where we can't go anywhere. Like you physically can't connect these houses to any infrastructure like water. So that's the end, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean that's the end. I mean, like, that's like, and it's even kind of getting into the stage now whereby like the immigration stuff is causing, it's sort of kind of like a non-linear thing, whereas what I mean by that is basically where we keep hearing this thing, for example, and again, it just goes back to the kind of like previous assumptions. You've heard it, like, there's labor shortages. People can't find anywhere. People can't find a teacher, or people can't find someone to work in the shop. And the reason there's a lot of labor shortages is because there's no housing for people to move to, which is caused by the massive increase in population. So, like, when you kind of like view the world in terms of this, like, there's just one way to do it. It's trying to manage the debt, keep everything paid off, like keep your systems running. They start kind of running into other problems in the background. Like, I mean, for example, another one which I think is it's very interesting, and I think it's just another growing disparity, because again, all of these things that I've listed off, like, they disprove these models, right? Disprove this whole kind of utility thing. I mean, here's one. I mean, during the I have a tweet in this. Let me just bring it up here. or I had a tweet on this before, is during the presidential election, right? There were a number of trends which I would say are going to start like running into walls increasingly as well. And one of those is that the vote percentages between spoiled ballots and non-spoiled ballots for men compared to women was much higher. Like 25% of men spoiled their ballot in that election, the
Base
presidential
Chads.
one, compared to 8%. Yeah, yeah, and like it's just like this chart is incredible here. Like it just shows you the increased like disparity that is coming up between all of these. So basically, like just to wrap up to your point, like you know the academics you listed off, the people who wrote those reports, the civil servants, right?
Hmm.
We're, I think, entering an increased period whereby like that cohort of people is becoming increasingly isolated and separate from everyone else. So for example, like we're getting into a situation now whereby like if you kind of look around or kind of talk to people, or like I mean, there's a lot of like Red Sea studies and surveys done on this about like how 75% of the population think there's too much immigration, all of that, right? But if you take a look at that compared to say something like Trinity students, right? And the reason I bring up Trinity students is because of the fact that those people are, I mean, the university system is essentially there, among other reasons, to kind of like bring people up and to bring people up to be your kind of like future elite, for lack of a better phrase. So the people who design these kind of reports, write these reports, are this kind of like social democrats, you know, in their own kind of area and society and things like that. Whereas, if we go into kind of areas of West Dublin, I'm just going back to one of my slides here, like, Dublin Northwest, 21% of them spoiled the vote. 21% disproportionately men, disproportionately working class. And these are the kind of areas which are kind of like turning to like independence and the National Party and all that. And yet, the people who are kind of groomed to be, your future civil servants, your future NGO workers, your future uh, engineers or doctors or whatever, they see the world in a very different way. So
Yeah, and I'll
that's,
sorry to cut across you, but just to add on that onto that, I mean, I noticed in the introduction to one of those reports, I think it was the economic report, they start off by basically bragging about the success that Ireland has had, and they say, since the Irish economy has grown so rapidly since the 90s, and then following the crash, it rebounded, and then COVID, it rebounded. And oh, but of course, we're having these small issues, that we have to address. And they actually look at it like detached. It's like a detached thing.
yeah,
Whereas, like someone not being able to actually buy a home or get even rent a home at an affordable price, like that's actually a life debilitating problem. That problem holds you back from being able to move on with your life. You can't start a family. You can't really get married. You can't do all of those things that people generally want to do in a healthy society. And people at the top, the social democrat types, like the progressive types, basically, they actually are so detached from this because they grew up with, like, little Holly had a wealthy father who was a doctor. He worked in the Mater Hospital or whatever it is, and they're not really seeing that no, this is not just some intangible problem like racism or climate change. No, you can actually like this is over your life. You are being basically robbed. You're being robbed of the opportunity to live in a free and healthy way with your peers and with your family. So it's that's why you see that radicalization there, because for those people, particularly those men, they see it. They can't be bullshitted. Basically, you can't go to someone and start rambling about climate change when they're being basically priced out of ever owning a home. And if they complain about it, oh, now you're just far right and you're on the dole. That's basically it, isn't it?
yeah, yeah, exactly. And what that even kind of just builds into as well is the fact that um, you basically kind of have this kind of situation as well. Like it's not even just between the kind of groups here; it's also between older generations and younger generations. I mean, David McWilliams, say what you want about him, he actually wrote a very good article about 3 or 4 days ago, talking about like how increasingly, like, if you take a look at things like the average age of TDs and the average age of senior civil servants, they're in the late 50s, early 60s. And that group as well is doing, disproportionately well compared to the rest of society. I mean, like,
Paradoxically, as this is all unfolding, the house prices of people over 40, because they're basically the only, like, I know, like, I fall just between these chairs. So I look down at the younger people and I see, wow, they can't do what I did. And I look at the people older and, like, they're well established and their homes will keep um, increasing in value as this gets worse, paradoxically.
yeah. And that's where even things like the fair deal scheme is going to kind of come into it as well, because, like, the more your house is worth, the more you can kind of afford your nursing home bills, and that's going to become increasingly a thing as well. I mean, it's not like, I, maybe this is kind of like depressing stuff in a sense to talk about, but when you have a kind of like an economic framework whereby it just assumes we can just bring people and people are all the same, you have these clear bits of data which are showing, and just not even data, like just anecdotal evidence, just day-to-day experience showing, like, these trends, like, this is not, it's not going to, there's a lot of worms like that there's a lot of things that can kind of go wrong here, and ultimately, like, one of the trends that is kind of emerging, um is that, yeah, you're heading into a society which is just increasingly just kind of disparate in its own bubble. And there would be certain, I don't know, recommendations and solutions. I could kind of talk about some of that if you're kind of interested, but, like, you know it's just amazing how, like, again, if I go back here to some kind of the earlier Irish economic reports, here we go, sorry about this, the Telesis report. Like, if you read this, it's obviously a bit dry, civil servanty kind of, it's not like a fun read or whatever, in that way. But, like, there's a plan, there's a goal. There's a real kind of, like, we want Irish industries to do better. That, there's a real focus to this. There's no kind of like 2000 scenario thing. Like, there's something very, very firm behind it. And it's a combination of just like this, well, this might happen and this event might happen and this event might not happen, kind of flimsy waffle. And that's compounded as well by, I suppose, kind of, I mean, there's a few other different reasons for it, but, like, the fact that, like, everything is increasingly, like, massively bureaucratized now, right? So you end up now with a system whereby, it is kind of just harder and harder to get things done, essentially. So, like, even things like, they talk about, like, these kind of vast infrastructural, you know issues that they need to, oh, we're going to build this, like, bit of road, or, and then the question then becomes, like, why was this so much easier to do in, like, the 80s and the 90s? And, like, I mean, for example, like, if we want to go back to kind of like optimizing the economy, right? I think one of the most important foundational things, if you're going to build an economy, is make sure your energy is okay. Because if you've got cheap energy, you can kind of do whatever the hell you want. And in the age of, like, AIs, which are massively data intent or energy intensive, it's really good to have cheap energy, right? And, even whatever you say about the climate change stuff and whatnot, an easy way around that is to go nuclear. But what's happened has been, especially since the Russia-Ukraine war, whereby, like, gas prices took a major spike in 2022, and Storm Aowen, which basically wiped out the entirety of the western, you know, the west side of the country's kind of electrical grid for a while. I mean, there are people who are without power for, like 10, 15 days in some cases. Like, these should be
Yeah, it was 2
major.
weeks in the West, in Galway and places like that. It was actually unbelievable, and I remember there was like a bit of like, the Dublin media was just completely disconnected from it, really. They just didn't register as this problem, that it should have.
Yeah, 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 exactly. Like, and like, just like, this stuff, massive gas price spikes, you know half, the west of the country just gone without power. This should be kind of like major wake up calls to like we need to get the energy stuff like working now. And instead, what we're doing is we're shutting down, Shannon Bridge. We're shutting down Lanesborough.
Yeah,
We had all these Eamon Ryan kind of Green Party guys shutting down LNG terminals. We've got electricity coming in from kind of interconnectors from France and soon to be Spain,
which is
and that's
nuclear.
all. That's all well and fine, but we're completely reliant on, and even from a foreign policy point of view, we're completely reliant on other countries for all of this.
Yeah,
And
and you know what the most scary thing actually was when I read
hmm,
that part, and there's a whole section dealing with like green energy, and they say the green transition is one of the things that they're pursuing most aggressively. So they're pursuing policies that are going to make energy more expensive, less reliable, and overall it's going to harm the people over time. And there's no real like understanding if this is actually going to even be plausible as a solution to the energy. As you're increasing the population, you would need fossil fuels basically more at mostly at that point, because you simply with other energy sources, it's not as energy dense. So you need way more infrastructure to try and generate electricity. And they're doing these solar farms and everything. I mean, I don't think that's going to be viable in Ireland long term, because we just don't have the sun really to drive that. But they're true believers in it, and that's what's frightening to me is that I'll show some graphs later on when we talk about the report, but like they actually show like this was the core priority was managing this,
yeah, no, sorry, I think my internet dropped out for a second there, but yeah, I got the last of what you were saying there. Yeah, I mean, there's all that kind of stuff just wrapping into the background, but like, yeah, I mean, on that stuff as well, there's also the fact that it's not just the fact that it's getting more. I mean, this is one thing that really surprised me. Like, they were talking about kind of like, AI and AI technology and whatnot. But one of the things about AI, and one of the things about all these kind of models and data and whatnot is that, again, they take a huge amount of power and energy to kind of match up. So like you can't go in the direction of like, we're going to decarbonize and, you know, while at the same time like trying to bring in an infrastructure which requires far more power. you know,
yeah.
it's it, yeah, it's baffling. I just see there you have the is that the Gript video?
Yeah, I was going to try and play that actually as an introduction to these reports, because Pascal Donahue is basically laughing his ass off. It's so like unserious. Like these people, I've no faith in these people. You know,
Hmm.
they're badly motivated and they're thick. That's the worst part of it. They're really thick people, like. And
Yeah,
so
I
he's just
mean,
giving you this list of like cliches, basically. Oh, this doesn't work in Hungary. And in the report, like they actually address some of these concerns, and they say, well, things like childcare are positively correlated, like having free childcare, for example, are positively correlated with increasing the demographics a little bit. But that it's generally these kinds of policies have a weak correlation um, with fertility.
yeah, I mean that's the thing again. Like, a weak correlation. I mean, even pushing it upward is still kind of a positive thing. Not even only just from a kind of an actual getting the birth rates up from their end, but just a general. It's good to have families. You know what I mean? I mean that on one end, but also on the other end, from what you were kind of saying, like in terms of like how these people are just. I mean, there was an interesting thing. I remember watching a clip by your man Dominic Cummings, and he was talking about the fact that like he's brought this up in kind of essays and things like that before, whereby like basically the quality and the ability of a lot of civil servants has declined precipitously over the past few decades. So like if you were in the civil service like a few decades ago, like you were genuinely very, very intelligent. But what's happened now because of the way it's kind of run and being bureaucratized, plus a lot of the fact that, you know, there's way more kind of industries and whatnot, like, smarter people end up like in, you know, because there's so many other fields, those people who have ended up in the civil service are now going elsewhere. and you're getting a less competent, more kind of bureaucratic version of politicians who can't get things done and who can't think in the way that you would need to be in these positions. I mean, like, if you go back to that guy, James Burnham, the guy who wrote the Managerial
Yeah,
Revolution.
James Burnham. Yeah, yeah.
Burnham, yeah, just talk about the fact that, like, the means of production are basically turned into the means of organization. So this layer of bureaucrats, whether it's in a big multinational or whether it's in like the Department of Finance, these are actually the most powerful people in the country, not Pascal Donoghue in a sense. And you want those people to be positive, good, smart, you know, think about the country, think outside the box and whatnot. And then you have that clip, like you were saying, and they were just laughing about this.
Yeah,
They're
the
a
idea was
fucking
so absurd. Like the idea that someone would even suggest this was crazy. Yet the same government has facilitated the immigration of over 1.5 million people to the country in 20 years. Now, that's an extreme policy.
yeah, yeah, and it's kind of like the way that like they it's brought up like, oh, they're center right, you know, and these are the people that are brought in the most like revolutionary, y- you know, mind-boggling
Social agenda.
social change I've ever seen. Like, I mean, again, maybe just referencing back to hockey, and I sound like maybe maybe too positive. Although I'm not, as by the way, but like, you know, people talk about him or whatever being corrupt. I mean, this stuff is a whole new level, you know.
Yeah.
And I know that was leading in this direction. You can talk about that, all that kind of stuff as well. But it's just, yeah, it's something else, you know.
Have you a few other tabs you want to kind of discuss? If not, I might try play that video that I introduced.
Yeah, if you want to maybe play the video and I'll
Okay.
go through my stuff and I'll just kind of organize it a bit better into a couple of main points.
Okay.
We now, at this point, have 4 people of working age supporting each retiree. No other country in Northern Europe or Southern Europe or advanced economy is in that space. I think we're probably the second most favourable with that ratio. And I suppose the point I was making is that is going to change, not so much in the next 5 to 10 years, but from the mid 2030s onwards, we're going to see a dramatic fall in that ratio. So by the 2060s ish, we will have only 2 people. So you and I will support one retiree, whereas you, I, Minister
Trajectory.
Donoghue, and Kevin at the moment support one retiree. So that's what I'm talking about, the demographic.
Like this guy won't be supporting anyone in his retirement because he's probably never had a job outside of the civil service. He's probably always been in that infrastructure. So I noticed that one of the big takeaways I had that I was going to bring up at the end of this is that at no point in any of these two reports does the scale of the government, the size of it, ever come into question. We're supposed to just accept that the state is going to grow and grow and grow. And maybe AI and automation, these two buzzwords, are going to maybe affect that, maybe make them more efficient. But at no point is it ever conceived that, well, maybe the radical spending that we've embarked on for the last decade was a bad idea and a waste of money. Never. There's no actual scope in this at all. There's no hard questions are asked. You're just sitting here listening to these two grinning. I don't want to say what I want to say, but they're laughing in your face about this. Like explaining these things to you like you're a toddler. Like we've been talking about these kinds of things publicly for 10 years at this point. And I remember being called a fucking lunatic because you're basically saying, yeah, they're working on population replacement. They're literally trying to replace the population because it's the only way they can keep this model going. And here they are now, just like, oh, it's just totally normal, of course. We just always talk about this. It's not a word here. Just have to accept this. And and there's never any accountability for any of the things that they've done. You know. Yeah, let's play on for a second.
Traffic sweet spot.
Minister, and I might also ask Mr. McCarthy, obviously, given that there's going to be a major demographic shift like the one you described, where the number of young working people will be significantly reduced compared to the number of elderly people who are in need of support. We see other European countries like Norway, for example, which has commissioned a birth rate committee to investigate the causes and possible consequences of the country's falling birth rate and maybe look at ways to reverse those population trajectories, and other countries have employed similar strategies. Is that something that the government would or could or should consider in this country, given that this is a long-term problem and that would seem to mitigate it somewhat?
So our contribution to that debate is really this report here today, because I think one of the most impressive parts of the report is the effort that the team have made to consider what demographic change will have on the long-term economic growth of Ireland. And the period of demographic change that we could enter into is very different from the period of demographic change that we've been experiencing over the last number of decades. Because in the last number of decades, we have seen a growing and young population, and the forecasts here outline the likelihood of a population that's still big by historical standards, but is also older. So we are attempting to intervene in that policy discussion with this report. I'm not planning any further publications or work within this area, because I think it's done very well here. And in terms of how we can support families with their children and with decisions that they make in relation to the size of their own families, that is why the work that we do with regard to the affordability and accessibility to childcare continues to be very important. And I think that's the most sensible way a government can be of help in recognising and supporting the choices that family want to make for themselves.
You see, the problem here is that he doesn't differentiate between any people. So he, in his mind, bringing people from the farthest corners of the world and giving them family supports and everything is exactly the same as giving it to Irish people. You know, supporting the healthcare of all these people who you bring here. This is the exact same problem in his mind. He can't even countenance that maybe like we've the wrong approach, that we need to actually start thinking a little bit more internally about our own existence, like as a sovereign country, you know. Hang on, your audio's gone out. Hold on. What is going on now?
Gone, is it?
Um, Hold on 1 second. You should be back now. No, I shouldn't. This is it. Sorry, I cut you out there. Sorry for that last sentence there. I when I changed the scene, I had your audio off on that one. Sorry.
Am I back now, so?
I think you are back now. That's fine.
Perfect. Okay, yeah, no worries. Yeah. So basically, what I was just saying is the way that they're kind of looking at this in terms of, it's not just the point you were talking about, like how people are kind of interchangeable. You know, someone from another part of the world is the same as kind of someone here, right? The way that they kind of focus in on and don't kind of like talk about what the assumptions are, and you can kind of maybe sum the entire report up in this kind of one bit. I mean, the idea that like we'll give families support for childcare. So then the question then becomes, again, there's nothing wrong at all whatsoever with, people in childcare or kids in childcare, whatever. But it's a very disconnected way of running your society. It used to be the case whereby like there wasn't anything like this because, communities and families looked after each other, right?
Yeah.
Or things like nursing homes. Nursing homes never used to be a thing. And, if you went back a few decades, the idea of older people being put in a nursing home would be such an alien concept. I mean, these are kind of like foundational things or foundational questions to ask, or even kind of like pulling it back because, like, there's quite a bit of data on stuff like, how fertility rates actually go up if people have housing and people can afford houses. Like, I mean, I've said it before, like the housing crisis is the biggest. It's one of the top 5 at the very least, like crises that has befallen or been caused by the state. And like even kind of going into this report, like that, there was an Irish Times article which kind of picked up on this point as well. Like basically, if they don't build 300,000 houses, so that would be, in the realm of like 50, 60,000 every year, and they're only able to build about like 30,000, that the housing crisis is going to continue for another 15 to 20 years. And they kind of
and they just say that, like, oh,
Yeah,
it's
they
just
just
going to
say it.
continue for another
It's
15
just-
years, and there's not a revolution somehow. I mean, I find this absolutely amazing. Like 15 years, that's the fertility window of the average woman, basically. Like you're talking there about your opportunity to have a child is being robbed from you by these policies. And yet the majority of these people will support the Social Democrats.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's that one in a sense is remarkable enough because I actually I did a video a few months ago when I was trying to work out the pent up demand, and the pent up demand right now is, it's in the realm of about, I would say, about 250,000 houses. Interestingly enough, they had a number that it was only 100,000, but they referenced other people who had about 250,000 as the pent up demand. So 250,000 houses, like, so basically, like, if you wanted to fix up the housing crisis, the way things are right now, in terms of just a supply point of view, you would have to basically double the supply of housing for the next 10 years if you were to fix it in 10 years.
Yeah.
And, like, then you're kind of asking the question of, like, okay, where can we kind of pull back from that? Can we look at the supply side? Can we look at the demand side? Again, nothing. Or the fact that I did another bunch of things on this, like the way that like the housing market increasingly seems to be going. You've heard this kind of thing, or we've been in a kind of a, you might know someone who's in a WhatsApp group or whatever, and they turn up at an estate, and then 75% of the houses are being bought up by Indians.
Yeah.
And like, if you have that scenario, then basically it means that Indians are propping up the whole housing market.
Yeah, and it's
that,
exactly the same development model that they have in Canada. You notice actually this model is distinctly Anglo. Like if you actually think about it, like America being founded as this kind of plantation, like this is and then that extends that model since World War II. That becomes the global hegemon, and this idea that they're gonna like they're the global hegemon, they're the economic model, and we're put through like a fast track program basically since Whitaker, basically to try and catch up, because that's what created the EU. Really, it was actually American progressive economists were very much involved in it, and it was Jean Monnet who was really integrated. It actually wasn't Kalergi, for example. People go on about Kalergi. It's actually kind of a red herring because he's interesting and everything, but the real intellectual mind behind the EU is actually Jean Monnet. And Jean Monnet was very close with the American and British progressives. And these were the guys that were planning basically European reunification, how they were going to manage the economy. So that's why Germany is boxed in a way by the EU. And the idea is that you keep Europe kind of separated like that. So Germany is boxed in between America and Britain on the one side and Russia on the other. And the idea being that you kind of extend American cultural and economic hegemony then over Europe, their model. And if you look at like American immigration ideas have basically been marketed, or not marketed, they've been deliberately seeded into Europe. And so if you look at this idea of like nursing homes, like this kind of idea is coming to us from America, really, where the family just breaks up, old people retire to Florida, the young go off to college, and no one is basically together as a unit, you know.
Yeah,
And that's the model. That's the model that like there's no questioning that paradigm, you know.
yeah, and there's no kind of like, I don't know how can I kind of put it, like, the system has kind of been decentralized in the way that, like, the people that are in these positions, they're, like kind of civil servants or whatever, kind of comfortable, well off, all of that kind of thing. But the pressures that that's going to create, I mean, like if you get into kind of any, or if you take a look at kind of societies which are kind of more run down or corrupt or whatever, you know, as kind of certain resources and things like that get kind of more and more rare, people start kind of acting out more kind of like in a zero sum kind of game fashion. So basically, like, you end up whereby people are, well, everyone else is kind of corrupt beside me, why shouldn't I be corrupt, right? So if you've got this kind of like separation between these distinct groups, that kind of increases people's desperation and the incentive to do these, kind of like corrupt things. But again, just, I'm kind of wandering off your point. I'm going on a bit of a ramble here, but like, just to kind of go back to your point and like, on EU integration, like, it's, you really do see it back in the 40 report, because like that was another thing that kind of struck me when I was reading. I was thinking, like, God, I could be like, if you just did a copy and paste and just replaced Ireland with Canada
Yeah.
and changed a few numbers, you're reading the exact same report.
Yeah.
Whereas again, even if you go back to like 1980s with this, with some of the economic stuff back then, they're basically like, and I'll finish off on this point. Like, there's, like, just kind of on another side point, one of the things that I've been kind of like doing videos on or doing streams on is kind of like what exactly happens psychologically, mentally, after the crash, and how that transferred into kind of Fine Gael and Labour and whatnot from 2011 onwards. But there are real significant changes in this country in the 90s as well, in the early to mid 90s. And, people talk about the Celtic Tiger, and people talk about, like, the 80s being really bad and whatnot. But there was this kind of window where I think a lot of stuff happened. And you can see that change in documents like this, in the way people talk, in the way people view the world. And yeah, it just goes back to this massively kind of, well, yeah, just Anglo system, like you were talking about. And that goes into so many other areas. I mean, you can talk about things like culture and music and things like that as well with that, because there was stuff behind that as well, which is, I mean, that's obviously kind of a whole other topic. But
I mean,
like,
it's so paradoxical because basically their whole definition of economic success and sophistication is actually this. Like, this is what they were actually working towards the whole time. Like, we have to break down these kinds of organic kind of family structures, communities, and we have to basically economically make efficient the whole society. And now that they've done that, they've all these problems, and yet they never are in any way accountable. Like, they never say, like, well, why are all these bad things happening? And all the left wing will say, well, it's that the government is failing to deliver housing, quote unquote, this kind of thing. but they're actually of the same mind. They all share that same utilitarian mind. Like there's no consideration that the Irish people exist, that they have specific needs and rights in their own country. It's never considered
Mm. Yeah.
because that's racist, and that's basically what the apotheosis of this paradigm is. We're supposed to have unlimited capital and unlimited social transformation. Capital has the right to socially transform society. That's the new elite. So the left wing, that's why the left wing has this relationship, what we call left wing. Like they are basically about social transformation. And capital loves that because that creates all these different markets, even marketing antidepressants. Like that's a market that is opened up by social transformation, and capital flows into that and makes billions every year. Like we have the highest consumption of antidepressants apparently in the EU, like I've heard.
Yeah, like and I'm far from a Marxist or anything like that, but like there's been there were socialist economics guys talking back in the day. I think Marx was actually one of them, but basically the idea that like even back then, like in the 19th century, like the idea that they don't want trade unions building up, right? So they would support any kind of idea or way of like making sure trade unions don't develop, and that would include things like bringing in kind of like or supporting kind of like anti-family practices, so like if you kind of incorporate that even in terms of like what you were saying with like the whole kind of EU structure, that kind of goes into things like removing the dollar from the gold standard and trying to make the American dollar kind of like the main currency of the world, and then wrap a free trade system around that. And again, it goes back to the kind of optimization thing. Like, yeah, you might get your shirt or your coffee pot or whatever like really really cheap, but the result of that is that the manufacturing has gone from your country,
Yeah,
and
and like
a lot of people
that
are out
dividend
of work.
has been devoured now when you think about it. Like we had the 90s, and so this is actually leads into what we're going to talk about. So like because of Haughey's, forward thinking, kind of hands-on practical economic, like he wasn't an economist, but he had intelligence, and he had this practical hands-on idea that we need to be at the forefront of this new change. And we were, in fairness, like they actually succeeded in pulling that off. And yet we can't think outside of it now. Like there was dividends was made there, and it's been pissed away, really. Like
Yeah,
there's really poor preparation for anything that's going to come after. And that's what's really infuriating, is that by the end of this, I've heard people say this on social media, like we're not going to have much to show for it apart from hotels full of like Nigerians and Somalians. In like we've managed, that's the great efficiency of Western capitalism, is moving people from one corner of the earth to the other for no particular reason. Like there
yeah,
was no, like what was the advantage? Like what's the economic efficiency that's created by picking a guy out of Somalia and sticking them into a hotel in Mullingar?
yeah,
Like, what does that serve? Well, it serves a whole load of client industries. And so our economy has become all about clientelism. If you look at how our government functions now, like what they're actually doing, it's a form of corruption. I class it as a form of corruption. It's supported by the left, and it's supported by the establishment cronies, because they're the guys lining up to buy these shitbox hotels, which were probably in many cases built due to a tax break that was given in the 90s that would never have otherwise been built. And now some guy buys this hotel up with a guaranteed contract, didn't even have to bid for it. Just the fact that he knows like someone in the political system, basically. It's like he got a tip off. We saw this self critiqued. We were doing streams back in 2018 where we were like talking about like hotels in Waterford, Wexford. There was Garrod Murphy was going around to Clare and all, Lahinch, filming these meetings and everything. Gran Torino did that. And we were looking at this happening, like some guy just buy a hotel. Like this is not capitalism. This is deep corruption, because they knew this was going to happen. They were getting ready for this basically, and they're buying this stuff. What good does this do our society? Like to me, this is like the most corrupt form of rent seeking imaginable. Like the closer you are to the government in Ireland, you just get money thrown at you. Basically, you can do whatever you want. You're totally unaccountable. The left has no problem with this form of corruption.
Yeah, but but the reason it's like that is because it's kind of like framed around like, oh, we're such good people, they're all victims, and they're all fleeing war and all of that, despite the fact that they'll a big chunk of them, like Martin, will turn around and say that, like, 80% of them have had their application rejected elsewhere, and you know we do exactly the same thing here, and all of this kind of stuff. Like, it's just, you know it really is just like, it's just infuriating, like,
Yeah, total misallocation of capital and resources.
Yeah.
At every level.
But Banty or whatever gets to pocket another million out of this. It's
astonishing, because I remember they were hounding property developers for years. Even after the crash, they tried to scapegoat fellas who were basically just building houses. Now, maybe they weren't building houses very well, and maybe they were gurriers. But my God, I mean, it was a far better economic model than this. At least, like, by driving up house prices artificially, they didn't have to, like, bring in fellas from all over the world to contribute to it as much,
Yeah, and they even
that social cost is passed on to the public. Like, so there's private profit and all the costs. This is the same with the multinational economy. Like, we train people, we spend tens of thousands on people's education, and then they get onto an airplane and they go to Australia. They spend their productive years in Australia. Some of them might come home, but usually they don't, because it's not very viable.
Yeah.
Like, and then we take a guy from a hotel somewhere who's basically lying, because the truth is there's hundreds of millions of people who just want to come to Europe because it's a nicer place. And in my opinion, we just shouldn't let them. And that's it. We just shouldn't let them. We've no obligation to do this. This is a moral paradigm that is being posed on us. It's actually a bastardized Christian paradigm, basically. You metaphysically cannot say no. It's evil to say no. You're the devil.
Yeah, and even it kind of goes into, I remember you did a stream on this back in the day, the weapons of mass migration, was it?
That book? Yeah.
Yeah, and you were talking about the fact that, like, I mean, I've read that book. It's a great book, but, like, you've got, again, back to the Social Democrats thing, like, you've got, like, a Holly Cairns, oh, they're just fleeing war or whatever. And then, that's a good book just for anyone in chat, but, like, that book will go to the fact that, like, it's used as a foreign policy tool. I mean, an example of that right now is Russia trying to send migrants to the Finnish border and the Polish border and trying to push them into Europe. And it really is just being used as a battering ram by Russia against Poland and Finland. And this stuff has been used, like, and there's a line I forget in the book, but basically it's the idea that, like, a lot of regimes will know that countries like us, or Social Democrats equivalent, will think in this way, and they know that they can get away with stuff they shouldn't be allowed to get away with. And it's that kind of conception, like, and whether it's that or whether it's the fact that, like, I mean, I think I remember I brought this up on I had my own kind of stream on this, but I was talking about the fact that, like, if you take a look at the CSO numbers between 2010 and 2021, about 135,000 Irish people left and kind of didn't come back. So we were down like 135,000 people. And in population terms, that's just under like 3%. Now, I mean, imagine, like, if you, maybe this is kind of extreme overreach or kind of overstretching things or whatever, but, imagine just saying, like, there was a big issue or a big conflict whereby 3% of your population just disappeared, and they were disproportionately younger people. Now, I mean, obviously, they haven't disappeared or whatever, but, the point is that, like, you've got this cohort of competent, young, more kind of, like, in certain ways economically productive people, and there has been no attempt to bring them back. And in fact, like, I've heard things, like, in terms of, I think someone was telling me before that, like, there was the place that teaches students to be primary teachers, I think in Limerick, Mary I,
Hmm.
that at one stage, like some company in Dubai had bought up a big billboard and just put it outside there and go, come to Dubai,
Yeah.
and like you're training up these people to leave, and there's no response to that. Like, any sort of remotely Irish or nationalist government would be shocked by that.
Yeah, like
But
there's these glaring problems, and at no point in the report is that mentioned. Is the idea that like mass education is the answer for everything? This is all they can think of, like, and you're like, well, if you have a skill shortage and yet we've never educated more people than ever, what's going on?
yeah,
Like, you'd think that would draw some interest from an intellectual perspective for some of these specialists. But it's like you were saying earlier, it seems that the standard is just precipitously after falling, and they just simply don't think this way. There's groupthink, basically. And groupthink basically affects all institutions at some level. That's what happens with bureaucratic institutions, is that they become calcified and in certain ways cannot innovate outside of that. Now, they'll talk about innovation. They'll say like we're creative and we're coming up with all kinds of ideas. But you look at these reports, I mean, it's so grim. There's no vision here at all. There's nothing unique about it. You could be, like you were saying, it could be a report written for Canada, could be written for Britain, could be written for Germany. And I guarantee you there's a report identical to this in every one of those countries.
yeah, yeah. And there's no incentive to kind of do anything about it. I mean, like, Mr. I don't know, Mr. Chud, right, joins the civil service, and he comes up with a really kind of good idea, but that good idea would involve stuff like, cutting waste or increasing productivity, and that's inversely kind of correlated with what bureaucracy is. So are they going to go with him, or are they going to go with like the guy who is good at kind of perpetuating, like, we're going to set up yet another housing committee. I mean, how many housing committees are there now? Like, the housing plan, housing research for all. Rory Hearn's on about like 4 or 5 different housing NGO boards.
Yeah, I mean, he's the greatest op of all time, really. I mean, how he is like massaged into every, talk, discussion, and he has a book, and it has this like kind of, young people marketed kind of name, like gaffs. It's just gaffs. Just gaffs, man. And he's down at Electric Picnic. Gaffs.
Yeah,
Like like they're putting you to sleep just long enough so that by the time you hit your late 30s and 40s, you can't do anything about it. And this guy is laughing at you, you know? He doesn't make any reference to supply. It's laughable.
yeah, yeah. Like, I mean, the whole thing, like, we can fix the housing crisis by, having a state construction company and, having a referendum, which some other countries have tried, and that referendum has been a disaster, by the way. Um, like, there's nothing there. There's nothing there. Like, I mean, like, and again, he's involved in all these housing NGOs, and there was one where he was talking about stuff like, fair price, right? Like building housing with a fair cost and a fair price, and it'll basically kind of eliminate. It'll basically boil down to, like, costs are kind of fixed at a certain point. But the problem is, like, if costs are kind of ultimately fixed at a certain point, with inflation at the way it is, no one is going to want to build. Things like that. Like, just how this guy,
Well, I
how
mean,
this
look
guy
at
is.
the costs of building materials. Like, I can tell you, like at the moment, like, the way costs went up during COVID, basically. Well, hardly any of those costs have reduced, really.
Hmm,
In terms of
yeah,
if you want to buy blocks, timber, those are the basics. Insulation, all that stuff. All that stuff's after increasing in price. Like, it frighten you when you go to a building providers now to buy anything like that. So
yeah,
that makes
and
projects just totally unviable.
yeah, yeah, and just kind of taking a look at it just is. There wasn't even any of that kind of stuff. I mean, like, again, it's kind of like reinforcing it in another way. So there wasn't kind of stuff in terms of, like, how to protect yourself from inflation, or how to, make your energy grid more robust and things like that, right? It was just, Yeah, it's kind of fascinating, just kind of like just to kind of read through this whole thing because um it just yeah it just kind of like I guess what I'm trying to say is that like it kind of even though it kind of like is just kind of your own economic report or an economic report that kind of stands by itself at a point in time, it actually does link up a lot to the stuff that you've been doing as well. Like even stuff from like 300-400 years ago, like you were talking about like William Petty, I think, with Critique on
Yeah,
the Last String. Like this stuff is kind of building blocks to where we are,
yeah.
and
It's the
it's
managerial technocratic mindset, and I think
yeah
a lot of people get like they get very conspiratorial about it sometimes. And I don't want to be patronizing either, because I know like there are, you know, conspiratorial aspects in some respects. You could say immigration is a conspiracy against the people by the way that it has been done,
yeah
because people have voted against it at every opportunity. They created entire branches of the intelligence service basically targeting so-called far right. They've been doing
yeah
that in England since the war. You know, this is what makes it so hilarious when these lefties go on about the far right being part of the state. It's the exact opposite. Like that is the main enemy of the intelligence services has always been the far right, and that's
mm,
why you've guys that have been locked away in jail in England, from the National Front all the way back.
yeah 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 no exactly yeah.
So yeah, now we have these two reports. How do you feel? You've got a few more tabs, or do you want me to just start talking about these reports?
Um, yeah, I mean, we can start talking about them. Like, I was gonna like I had some more stuff on like how Ireland's economy kind of worked in the 90s, but it's
Let's do
probably not
that,
as relevant.
because I have a cool video I can play as well that'll fill in with that. So let me just put you on.
Yeah, do you see mine now?
1 second now. Yeah, you're on.
Cool. So if you can see that, it's an article by he's very good, Peter Ryan, ryanresearch.co, and this is a fantastic article because I think there's a perception kind of like with the economy in Ireland, it basically, Dev's Island, once upon a time, the place was terrible. And then TK Whitaker comes along and, we join the EEC and things get way better. And it didn't really work like that. I mean, he even says it here, like the conventional story is that after decades of isolationism and protectionism, finally opened its doors to the local community, it liberalized the economy. These circumstances flowed into high growth economic trajectory, low corporate tax rates, foreign direct investment, foreign free flow of capital, interconnection to global supply chains. I'll just skip down. The results were higher access, but is the story correct? But to kind of sum this up quickly, is that it was actually a number of changes that the Fianna Fáil government made through that report. Just to show it back here, the Telesis report, which is basically an emphasis on manufacturing and electronics work. So basically, manufacturing the right industrial sectors, manufacturing done by Indigenous Irish firms.
Hard industry. That's manufacturing, physically making things connected to the inputs, upscale. Or what's the word? Up manufacture. What do they call that? Where you increase the value in a product, basically.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like it was genuine, proper, smart stuff, and like like even the reference of the name Celtic Tiger. Celtic Tiger came from like the Asian tiger, basically like Japan and South Korea and whatnot did kind of similar things, and Japan had a massive boom. Now, I mean, like you were talking about like earlier about like kind of US kind of like supremacy or kind of the EU and whatnot. I mean, there's a whole kind of thing among Japanese economists that like the Plaza Accord was basically an attempt in the 1980s, 1985 to kind of like shut down Japan because Japan were so good with this stuff. But what Japan basically did was they basically brought in all these multinationals, learned a lot of the skills, and basically just started putting it into our own industries.
Isn't that very
Into
similar
their
to
own
what
industries.
China is doing now?
Yes.
with Apple and all these guys. Like they're now the leading manufacturer of electric cars. All the battery technology, they're ahead of the Americans and the Europeans, it seems, and they're dominating the market now in cars because of that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it really is astonishing because like we got to the first step of that, and the first part of it seems to have gone quite well, but then back in towards the late 90s, we start transitioning into basically just the credit fueled mess, and then that leads into the economic collapse, and then we
Which
end
has
up.
actually also led to an immigration mess because that was the period where they really started pushing immigration. And if you go back to that era, you'll actually find that that's when they were getting organized with the NGOs as well, and they
Mm,
started collaborating. The government started collaborating under Fianna Fáil in the late 90s with the NGOs to flesh out the asylum and immigration system broadly, basically, because they had no real system, beyond a few basic things up until that point. And
mm,
I find that interesting. It all coalesces in this as capital and financialization is beginning to fly off out of control. The economy is overheating. We've got a construction bubble, basically. We're told we've never had it so good, and they're pumping the immigration as well. There's a connection between that.
mm. Yeah, yeah, no, I like, and it it really does kind of shift into that kind of thing because we go from kind of having a healthy mindset in terms of like manufacturing, somewhat kind of protectionist on our own side, providing kind of jobs for people, getting into sectors which were growing and exploding at the time. I mean, he has the example, Havoc, software company that did video game stuff and like Halo and the Matrix and whatnot. We built a lot of that.
Yeah.
This is good stuff, and ultimately, like, here's a good quote here. Um, he's talking about the economist that was um, that was advising Haughey. The creation of wealth in an open economy requires continual restructuring of industrial activities towards businesses which allow higher value added per employee, attending higher productivity than others, maintaining in those higher value added industries, and maintaining high levels of employment. Some industries are not subject to international trade. In the analysis, a distinction is made between traded and non-traded activities. Non-traded business includes services which are usually localized. I'm just going to skip down a bit here. This is the part, sorry, I wanted to read. For an economy such as Ireland, which is small and very dependent on world trade, industrial policy must focus on traded goods and on the non-traded industries such as infrastructural activities, which inputs are crucial to competitive success in the traded goods areas. The goals of industrial strategy for traded businesses in a developed country trying to achieve high international income levels are to continue to restructure industry to phase out businesses which are becoming subject to competition from low-wage countries, gain competitive productivity advantages in selected manufacturing businesses vis-a-vis other developed countries. I mean, that's fine and sensible, but like it really is. There is much more of a kind of an Irish first approach here.
Yeah.
And yeah, like it's just.
I've got a great video actually. Someone put this on Twitter. I have it queued up here. It's actually haughey futurism basically, and it really captures the optimism of that time. The way they were thinking compared to the way we're situated now, 30 years later.
Yeah.
Will I put it on now, or
Yeah. Go on for yeah. Sorry.
Just for the sake of it.
Yeah.
We'll go straight back to that in a second. It just fits in perfectly with what you're saying.
Is he a chairman, he is? Oh, he will be, yeah. An honorary chairman. I hope so. I tell you what we'll do, we'll make a Ballybunion bachelor of him. Well, we'll take him up, so see if they'll take him up on it. All right. Yeah.
I am convinced that we must concentrate on modern technology and science-based industry, microelectronics, information technology, biotechnology. Our young people are adaptable, educated for and eager to be part of the modern world. They rightly see no contradiction between the enjoyment of traditional things and a keen interest in what is new and modern. Neither do I. My Ireland is one that places a value on all it has inherited from the past, and at the same time, as a young country, is eager to be part of the new technological age. Here in the Microelectronic Research Centre in University College Cork, Ireland prepares for the exciting future that is opening up for mankind. Ireland largely missed out on the first industrial revolution for mainly historical reasons and because of the lack of raw materials and access to capital. But the qualities demanded by the second industrial age, inventiveness, creativity and imagination, we have in plenty. Nor do these new industries involve the desecration of landscape or the misuse of natural resources. They are our hope for the future, and we must set about excelling in them.
Okay. So yeah, I thought that was a great encapsulation. That was obviously a Fianna Fáil election thing, but it really shows that there was this like optimism in the country. You know that he was very much articulating what you were saying there. You know, semiconductors, electronics, hard manufacturing, positive message.
Yeah, I mean, like even the kind of like line on kind of like being rooted in the past and kind of expanding forward. I mean, this, that's a fun thing to watch. That video, like, it's just exciting and
Yeah, I
it,
love the
you know,
synth in the background.
yeah, the little keyboardy fucking thing. Yeah, yeah, it's really cool, like and now it's just like we just put our hands into the next multinational guy's pocket and let's 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 increase the population of the country to 7 million in about 15 years.
Yeah, like basically the country is not viewed, like you're saying, as having this historical continuity reaching back into antiquity. Basically, none of that exists. In all that exists is that Ireland has to attract economic development, and the only way to do that in their mind is that we basically provide we pay for all of the infrastructure like the data centers. We're going to turn our country into a landing pad. Basically, we'll take in hundreds of thousands of immigrants with no connection to the country whatsoever, other than their tether temporarily to this multinational. I mean, that employment is temporary anyway. I mean, people change jobs in the tech industry every year nearly.
Yeah.
And to base your whole future on that kind of thing, you know, uh, the flight of capital, the whims of capital, basically, the whims of like tech entrepreneurs from Silicon Valley, and AI is a massive bubble. I mean, that's going to absolutely blow up. There's no way that's going to continue the way it's going. Like these companies are valued now at multiples of like serious companies that actually make things.
Yeah, I want to do a video on that, but like Nvidia's share price and the percentage of those big tech companies as a percentage of the S&P 500 is huge. Like, I mean, you can talk about kind of a lot about kind of what AI is and what AI isn't, but you know, I just kind of wonder, like, you have all these kind of scenarios in the report, like, the 2000 scenarios or whatnot, but is there anything about the fact that, like, what the Trump regime's foreign policy is in terms of like the tariffs, like what the point of the tariffs is, and what is the kind of the fallout of like something like an AI bubble like this going? Because certainly from a kind of a size point of view or from a volatility point of view, it definitely looks to be bigger than the dot-com bubble,
It is,
back
yeah.
in the early 2000s.
Yeah, no, I mean, I haven't seen like these reports, especially make no relation to that. I mean, I'm just talking about the economic analysis I've seen of this. I mean, it makes no sense. Like what they're based for the dot-com bust. There was all kinds of companies that just popped up, and with the way AI is now, all these companies exist. They're not like social media companies. They don't make much money really, but the hope is that one of them will become the next Google or the next Facebook or something. But in reality, the majority of them will just disappear. And
Yeah.
so there's all this venture capital behind them, and that's what Silicon Valley basically runs on. You do an IPO and you try and sell, you go public with your little company. And I'm just thinking of all of these companies that, like, so many of them don't really produce much of anything. Like, what was the one that was it was renting office space, and that went tits up.
Oh, WeWork or something like
WeWork,
that.
yeah, that's a great
Yeah, yeah.
example, And I read a book about a guy. He was a journalist. He went to go work in a company called HubSpot, and
Oh, I've read that
HubSpot,
book. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
it's very
yeah.
good, isn't it?
Yeah. No, I've read the. I have it up. I actually have it in the house or somewhere. Yeah. Sorry, I was just
Yeah,
rambling
that
there,
would
but
make a
yeah.
great stream, because he's just describing the madness of the millennial kind of work culture that was that was about 10 years ago now or so. But like, he's describing like how these companies don't seem to really produce much. They have this kind of proprietary software, and it's like, well, what's really going on here? And it's all about being young, and anyone over 40 gets fired. Basically, you're gone. And all the young people are basically existing. They don't have any real employment protection or anything like they used to have in a corporation. Instead, you get free candy. You can go down
Yeah,
and you can have free M&Ms and Coke.
yeah.
In your
You
open
see,
office space chicken coop, where your screen is viewed from everyone else at every angle. You can never change the tab without being someone seeing you. You've no real privacy. And some of them then go home to live in these other chicken coops where you basically live in, like, you rent a bed in a barn, basically, in San Francisco. And yet you're earning $500,000 a year, but you can't afford to have a house.
yeah, like you see all these kind of videos of like, or it used to be kind of a thing like women will put them up or men will put them up or whatever. Like here's my day in the office, and it's like them just wandering around with all this kind of like corporate piano music in the background, and there's like beanie bag chairs and like
Yeah, 9 o'clock, make coffee. 10:30, walk down to the office, have a look around, do some work for half an hour, walk back up to the canteen, have my free coffee, and I'll do a video for YouTube or Instagram, and then I go to the gym, buy some food, and it's like, what was actually done? What did you actually do? Like, how is this productive?
yeah, yeah.
Because
How
if you look at other jobs like the construction industry and everything, like, you have to pull your weight. Like, no one carries you on a construction site if you're not working.
yeah. Yeah, no, that's completely true as well. And the only way that stuff is actually supported is because of the fact that, like, you have just these big bloated bureaucracies where, all this kind of money is floating in, and you have these venture capitalist Peter Thiel kind of guys who will just, like, I mean, he was one of the he was one of the first funders of Facebook.
Yeah.
And, like, like exactly like you said, he would just like put all this money and try and buy up these smaller companies, or get a share percentage of them, and most of them would fail, but if you have Facebook shares right at the start, you're made for life.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's the
yeah.
model. You get the IPO and you either fail unbelievably. And I've seen, actually, there's a whole genre of videos now where it's people who are like 35 or whatever, and they're making videos basically how I became a 35-year-old loser. And they're basically, like, I saw one a couple of months ago. I saw another one there recently, and the stories are very similar. There was one guy, like, he was a Canadian, and he's describing basically how he did everything right. He went to college, got the degree, he did something in computers, and worked his ass off, tried to build a company, and now he's 35. Because he was in a male-dominated industry, he never got to meet a woman. His company never made it. So he carries all this debt. He's living basically in a bedsit. And you're kind of like, what is it all about? Like, there's this great myth of the millennial entrepreneur, like, we're out there hustling. And I see that's transferred now into the next generation. So it seems to me that as the economic situation becomes more bleak, people kind of latch on to this kind of influencer culture of, I'm really jacked and I'm going to clubs and I have a business and I'm a multi-millionaire driving a Lambo. This is the dream. Everyone is just, all the young men are hoping I can be that one in a million guys, and it's all rented. You know, it's like he makes money as a social media influencer. That's why he has money, because desperate people put their eyeballs on this in the hope that they can allay the damage of this economic system.
Yeah, yeah, and it kind of feeds into the whole kind of thing of like parasocial relationships.
Yeah.
The idea of like building up a connection with a kind of a content creator, even though they don't know who you are, they don't give a shit, or you kind of have an imaginary friendship with them, or that kind of thing. But like if we were kind of talking about, like, we were going on earlier about the kind of the disparity between different groups. I think one point I forgot to mention there was if you take a look at, Kevin Cunningham had a article on this. Basically, he asked the people who spoiled their vote where your kind of main media news source is coming from, and compared to kind of like older people, boomers and whatnot, their main one was like stuff like RT and the Irish Times. But for that kind of group of spoil the vote people, it was actually stuff like TikTok and X and, well, Twitter, better name for it, and YouTube, and things like that. And one of the differences between, I think, those two is that the kind of parasocial relationship thing becomes, it becomes more powerful, basically. And if you have this kind of like, like if people are kind of running up against it, and having issues with housing or whatnot, that leads to kind of an avenue whereby, yeah, like you said, like people just get wrapped up in this kind of whole culture, which is fake, or bad for them, or and they kind of talk about, like, a free media, or giving money to RTE or the Irish Times to kind of like have freedom of expression and whatnot. But it's not just about that. It's not just about the fact that, like, people's kind of ideas or people's kind of like trust in the media has gone down. It's more the fact that, like, there's an additional, it's not just the information, it's kind of a product that's being sold with this whole parasocial relationship thing. That you can be that guy, that one in a
Yeah.
million guy.
That's the thing that's marketed. Like you can dream about this. It's like the equivalent of like someone being a porn star. Oh, you could be him. Yeah, but like one in a million guys isn't. So what do you want to It's just this aspirational, and it's like that's the real growth market. Is like get rich quick schemes. Everyone is like on the hustle. Everyone is on the what's the word they're using? Gotta hustle. Gotta everyone's trying to screw money out of people and project an image. It's all about your Instagram image and how you're presented yourself. I'm successful, and I've this, and I've this many cars and all the rest of it. Like Andrew Tate is an example of that. He kind of is marketed as like this kind of right wing version of that. And I think there's a lot of potential that these kinds of guys are being marketed specifically to right wing guys, so that they don't really start to get beyond this kind of level of like, well, you got to put your head down and work real hard. Well, maybe you have to think a bit more systematically about the world you want to make, because this has been brought about. This world that we're living in has been constructed, so we have to construct something ourselves, and it's not going to be easy. But yeah, this aspirational like marketing, like there's people are desperate, and you see the comments under these videos. People are like, "Oh, it's the same, nothing worked out." And then they have all in America. You have the student debt, so you could have $100,000 of student debt that'll follow you around for the rest of your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, have you any more points you want to pull out on that?
No, not really. I guess it's just kind of like building the case that like what's kind of happening right now is like just not the norm at all, from any point of view, and from even the kind of philosophy or what's worked in the past. Basically, that's kind of the main stuff I kind of wanted to get into there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think we can just look at the two reports then. There's a few pages I have noted. We might just have a look at those, and we'll comment on them, because there's some interesting things that they say that really summarize what this is about. So this is I'll just switch over. This is the demographic report. Future 40.
Yep.
This is the first report. It was put out a couple of months ago. And like I said, this is a solid growth model is what they're using basically. And a number of things actually are confirmed very early on. So on page 4, yeah, so they confirm that immigration basically cannot be allowed to fall. So they say the economic consequences of such a fall would be significant. It would pose major challenges for Ireland's enterprise base, diminish the capacity of the state to provide public services, and ultimately reduce living standards with a shrinking of the labour market constraining growth. And so then they say in a central migration, that's the main kind of central scenario,
Yeah.
where net migration falls from 42,000 to 35,000 over the projected period, these effects can be mitigated with the point at which labour force growth turns negative delayed. And obviously then depending on the projection you want to take, that you can increase immigration to allay that a bit. And of course then on page 6 they describe what we've been describing for years, that basically how radical immigration has been. So in advanced economies between 2000 and 2020, international migration contributed more to population growth, a net inflow of 80.5 million, than that of the natural increase, i.e. the number of births. And that's because of the low TFR, less than deaths, as net migration per annum to OECD countries increased by 92% over that period, which is pretty mental.
Yeah.
Think about it. And the only plan is to keep that going. And that's what's really. If you've any particular things you want to pull out of that document, actually, I can scooch down to the page. But I have a few different things I picked out.
Yeah. So I have a couple of. Am I on mute there?
No, you're
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I was looking at the wrong one. Yeah. So I had some notes on. So if you go to, the September 2025 document, there's a chunk right at the start on page 3. It says this analysis raises several important policy considerations.
Page 3.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm in the wrong report. Sorry, is it the other report you're on the?
Yeah, I think I'm on. Yeah, it's the other one.
economic.
Yeah.
Sorry, I got it now. Yeah. Yes, there we are.
Yeah, it's on page 3 of my one. I'll read it out anyway.
Okay.
So what it says is that it's referring to kind of like stuff to do with like total fertility rate and whatnot. But it says this analysis raises several important policy considerations. There are significant data limitations when it comes to understanding and forecasting migration trends in Ireland. The development of an integrated cross-departmental data system should be considered to allow for granular real-time analysis of migration trends. Now, when I read that, I was thinking, like, is that, the way that like Starmer has been pushing the whole digital ID thing? Are they kind of like talking about that when they're talking about departmental data systems that, like, because we don't have all the data, like, it goes back to Starmer's point of like, we can stop illegal immigration if we are able to kind of monitor people in this way. I didn't find anything else on kind of digital ID, but I thought that paragraph stood out a bit. And then, the next one I have here, you read that out. It's the one whereby like there's no net migration to Ireland or labour force would fall in size from 2035 onwards.
Yeah.
But yeah, this one as well. This analysis finds that immigration rate for certain migrant categories, i.e., immigrants to Ireland leaving the country after a period, are high, posing challenges from a fiscal, workforce, and integration perspective. Further research is needed to ascertain the reasons why exit rates are so high
Yeah.
for certain migrant cohorts. So they don't know.
Yeah.
That one's insane. Like, so they build an entire economic policy on this, and they don't know how long people are going to stay, which completely
Yeah,
it
it's like
makes a
filling
lot
a
of their
bucket with a hole in it. You're just pouring
yeah.
water into a bucket with a hole in it, and you're causing all of these problems. Like your floor is getting covered in water, you're flooding your house, and all you can sit there and say is, "Well, I mean, what else could you do?"
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I have a few more outside of that, but I mean, those ones kind of stood out to me as well. I mean, there's a
Yeah,
few more in
I have a
politics.
few here as well, and we'll go back and forth on it. I mean, they
Yeah.
summarize basically that there's been an increase in IPAS since COVID, net migration of Irish nationals. There's a graph there for that, on page 29. Uh, yeah, and you can see there it neatly is going back into the negative again. We're actually leaving the country,
Mm.
which is pretty grim as this is unfolding.
Yeah.
And so they say that basically these high projections of immigration, which, like I said, are driven mainly by family reunification, are likely to continue for the short to medium term. So they've never suggested any ideas about how they could stop that, how damaging it is. It's just kind of happening, and you just kind of have to, oh, well, it's just happening. It's like the migratory habits of birds, or, like the starlings or whatever. Like, oh, they just come and go. They didn't come and go before, but they're just coming and going now. And it's got nothing to do with what we have been doing, as if we've never had any long-term planning before this, as if the government hasn't pursued these policies aggressively for 20 years.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. And like as you kind of read it more and more into the report, it just kind of like it just dives deeper and deeper into that hole, you know?
Yeah, and I mean the TFR projections are there. I won't dwell on them, but they're like 1.5, which is really bad. I mean that's what I reckon is going to stabilize. And then there's actually an interesting quote here on page 58. Let's go to that as well. I want to talk about it. Yes, this is a summary. So, demographic flows over the next 40 years will have a compounding effect on future population trends. For example, if Ireland experiences low fertility and migration during this period, the working age population will shrink. So, this is uncountenanceable, basically. They can't possibly think about it. In turn, this will result in even fewer births in the long run, creating a negative demographic feedback loop and further increasing dependency ratio. So, it's all about the ratio. Just about if there's more young people, that's really good. Doesn't matter who the young people are, it will make it work. It's just they're all the same. They're all just interchangeable. This is extreme, like myopic kind of thinking. By contrast, a high migration and fertility scenario to some extent may mitigate the effects of an aging population and ensure that there is sufficient numbers of working age people to support an elderly population. This is pie in the sky, in my opinion. I don't think this will ever come to pass. The different trajectories of population growth presented have important implications for public policy. So it's just investment in infrastructure, housing, and transportation, healthcare, and education. I mean, anyone could write this. This is so basic and just uninspiring. There's no development of any alternative ideas. No interfacing with like uncomfortable ideas at all. Like they can't at any point do acknowledge the critics of this at all. They don't exist.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I had from the demographic paper. That's it's grim, but this is when feeds into the economic paper.
Exactly, because they're both like just completely kind of dependent on each other. On my end, Yeah, there's another line here in policy context. Migration flows both inward and outward. Also, this is just feeding in on your point. Also, have an impact on Ireland's economy and public finances. Immigration has the potential to offset some of these demographic challenges by boosting the working age population, filling critical skills gaps, and supporting sectors experiencing labor shortages. In turn, this can contribute to improved economic growth, innovation, and productivity. However, a significant increase in net migration also poses challenges in itself, particularly in ensuring that public services, housing, and infrastructure can keep pace with demand, which is in trouble. Further demands in these areas may even further compound delays in family formation. There, are,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. What is there to be said there? There are also integration challenges to consider, ensuring that recent migrants are able to fully participate in social and economic activities, and are not at risk of social exclusion. I
Yeah.
mean,
I mean, the assumption there is that people would automatically be integrated. There's something untoward about people, quote, not integrating. I mean, what does that mean? Like, people don't operate like that. When people, unless people are forced basically to live together, they basically won't. People generally want to live around their own people. Who wants to live among a bunch of people who've just moved in randomly? Most
hmm,
people don't want to live like that, and we know that from how they run up from white flight, basically, what was called white flight in America.
yeah,
And you see that trend as well. People move from Dublin out to the country, down to Wexford, down to Kerry, whatever it is.
mm, yeah, and yeah, it's just kind of the same thing we were talking about there before. It's like all these assumptions that where are they coming from? Like immigration has the potential. I mean, that's kind of weird. It has the potential. So
Yeah,
if it has the potential, that obviously implies, I mean, potential doesn't mean it's guaranteed to happen. So is that kind of a miswritten sentence, or is that like them kind of going, or the person who drafted this going, well, it might not work at all, actually, you
yeah.
know?
Bit of ass covering there, isn't there?
Yeah, yeah, a lot of it, like, yeah.
Yeah,
Um, I mean, in terms of other points, I think those are kind of the main ones, but I think,
yeah. On the demographic paper, yeah.
yeah, yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
well,
there's,
I mean, I have a good few notes on the economic paper as well. There's a few more interesting things in that, really. I mean, the demographic paper is terrifying in a way, but like that's basically all it addresses, really.
hmm,
That's a good summary there. I mean, really, they're just going to pursue this, that immigration is going to continue, and our TFR is going to go down to 1.5, probably lower. They actually project it could go down to 1.3 in lower scenarios.
hmm,
But this economic paper, there's a number of messages here. So they say that economic growth is set to slow down while public expenditure is set to increase. That's based on the demographics and the general economic picture. So there's a central scenario of declining growth, or what I would call managed decline, really.
yeah,
We're being managed into like, we know we're going into decline, and it's like we're in the nursing home when the pillow is just right there by your head, and you're
hmm,
kind of thinking like, well, is that going to go over my face at some point?
hmm,
Maybe it's not a perfect analogy, but kind of fits, I think. But so they're saying that there's a critical window, basically, that they're going to try and act. And the really scary thing about this is the energy thing. That's one of the things we picked up on. It is green energy. They're really going for the green transition. This team, climate change. They're going to do it all in one. Page 17. Sorry.
yep. Oh, yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So the climate emergency will have major implications for the Irish economy and for the Irish public finances over the next 40 years. Some of the impacts are already being felt, as Ireland has already experienced a 0.9-degree increase in annual average temperatures over the past 120 years, with notably warmer winters and higher precipitation levels since the mid 20th century. There has also been a 2 to 3 millimeter rise in sea levels each year since the early 1990s. As these trends continue or even accelerate, they will bring considerable economic and fiscal challenges. Changes to our, and I really find some of these connections that they're making a bit dogmatic,
Yeah.
But you could go on with that, but the they're on about increasingly frequency of extreme weather. I'm not so sure about all this. Like, this is, again, I think that's very questionable. Like, and then,
Yeah, I mean, how far does the data on those two graphs go back if you
well,
zoom in?
the first one there is number of frost days per annum. It goes back to 1960, and they're saying it's
So,
on a downtrend.
well, it's I wonder what would happen if you just removed the big spike, which I assume was the beast from the east a few years ago, was it? Or is it
Yeah, it
something
could
else?
be, that 2010 or 12, was it? I'm not sure.
Ah, okay, no, beast from the east was 2018, so that's probably
Yeah.
not it, but yeah.
Yeah, but like, yeah, the precipitation is increasing and frost is decreasing, and we have to decarbonize. But we know that decarbonizing the Irish economy would basically make no difference whatsoever, because countries like China and America are not even taking part in COP at this point.
Yeah.
So it is a kind of a bit of a cult. Like, there's a bit of a cult around this whole climate change stuff that is not realistic. And really what we're doing is we're just making ourselves uncompetitive, and we're going to compound these problems long term, and we're still going to deal with any climate issues that may or may not be arising because of this. We're still going to have to deal with them. We're going to have less economic room or demographic room to do anything about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, you can see it in all this stuff, like, even, the carbon tax and whatnot, I mean, like, I was watching, I think it might have been a gripped clip, but, like, Pascal Dunner was talking about how they expect the carbon tax thing to be a much bigger revenue generator, in the coming years. So, I mean, there's obviously a part of this kind of going into it, which is, the dogmatic stuff, but I think it's just kind of another tax by the wayside, like, like universal social charge, just adding more and more taxation to it, which I mean, like, if in terms of kind of an economic impact, I mean, if you want to take a look at where that might go, I mean, take a look at the UK. If you end up doing that, then like, the UK has the biggest amount of millionaires leaving it, and the thing with a lot of millionaires is, you know, they're your kind of more entrepreneurial people, or they can be, kind of high skilled people. So if those people end up leaving and their tax revenue goes down, then you have to keep taxing everything, to keep things kind of propped up, and that's
Yeah,
how
and they're
economies get
never
hollowed out
they're,
over
they're
time.
never decreasing public spending. Like, they've
Yeah,
radically increased public spending, and even to do with the health system here, they even admit here on page 90 that health expenditure in Ireland has risen significantly over the past decade. And they say a lot of it's got to do with the expansion of new services, health, larger workforce, increasing capital investment, and talk about the different more consultants in this. And then they say, however, this increase in expenditure and capacity has not been reflected in an equivalent rise in output. So they're becoming less efficient. And that tell
yeah,
if you're any organization that will be looking at your efficiency, and you're investing lots of money, and yet you're getting less output, that's a chronic problem. Like, that would be an emergency for any tech company or manufacturing company, where you're becoming less competitive. But, like, it doesn't seem to move the ball. It just kind of says, again, this is just going to continue, and there's not much we can do, and we're going to have to keep spending more money on the health service.
yeah, and like, that was actually one of the points I had kind of in the tabs that I was going to bring up, like, just related back to the IDA tab on kind of like
Will I put it in?
public sector. Yeah, just very briefly there, if you want. I think I have to share again, do I?
No, it's up. It's up. You just go to the tab.
Oh, okay, very good. Yeah, but basically, like, it's just a tab I have up here that basically, from Fianna Fact, Tuss's workforce up 48% since 2016. Children and care down 7%.
Yeah.
That's if there ever was kind of an example of like a public sector waste or whatever, well, there you go.
Pat Rabbit is the head of Tusla. And you think of his career trajectory. I mean, he started off as a trade unionist basically in the Labour Party. He was, well, first of all, he was a radical in student politics. Was he in Galway or Dublin? I can't remember. But wherever he was a radical. He was involved in the Workers' Party. Then they broke up. They went into the Labour Party then via a circuitous route through Democratic Left. I think he was in as well, wasn't he? I can't remember.
Hmm.
But ended up in the Labour Party and got into government during 2011 with that Fine Gael Labour coalition. And it was him, Gilmore. It was actually the Labour Party that really pursued gay marriage and this kind of radical social agenda in particular. That was a huge part of the trade union bloc. And it's, he just kind of parachuted out after government and got this job in this quango called Tusla, which was created by wasn't that Zapone, I believe.
Yeah, Catherine Sapone,
Yeah. So it's like this is an amazing, charmed existence, really, isn't it? And we all know about the things that have happened with people in Tusla's care in recent weeks and months.
Yeah.
And I've never seen much call for him to say much about it.
Yeah, no, that's true. Especially like even there's that major report that came out from UCD a couple of years ago about like just people being lost in Tusla's care. Like, how the hell do you lose kids, and just ending up in kind of really dark stuff. Just people leaving with groups of men and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, like that he's never kind of really criticized as much in relation to what has kind of gone on with Tusla. But yeah, and I'm going off point there, but yeah, I'm just kind of backing up your point there that like the kind of public sector kind of waste is just all over the place now.
Yeah, and the mindset is just not there. There's no incentive. And you see, my whole theory about Ireland's kind of economic and social development is that the middle class, public sector, civil service cohort, that cohort basically became very powerful since the 60s, because since the 60s, basically, they've been growing the size of the state and they got really good jobs, pensions, paid pensionable, all that, and in state bodies and everything. And in the 90s, then you had benchmarking under, was that Bertie Ahern? I think that was Fianna Fáil. And this is where all the salaries got indexed basically to like the high level private sector salaries. So these people in the HSC or any of these government quangos are paid on a scale according to like some very serious business who has to be accountable to markets and
Yeah.
and efficiency and competition. And if they're not competitive, they just go bankrupt. And so this is where the wheels really started coming off. And see, that cohort has been the backbone of Liberal Fine Gael and the Labour Party, and now they're on the cutting edge of Social Democrats, Green Party. You'll find it's public sector, civil society. That civil society sector was exploded in scale following the crash. That one of the first things they did, we could do a whole stream on that. Was the first thing they did was allow for greater expansion in the NGOs, basically civil society, in 2010 or 11. That was, I think, and that's another form of this. So now their radical kind of ideas are transferred into action, and you get this force acting on society. So as we're economically being picked apart and efficiency is gone and there's no accountability, you have this social engineering machine centered around Rethink Ireland, and a whole network basically of NGOs and operatives. And at the ugly end of it, the business end of it, it's people going around targeting nationalists for beatings.
Mm.
And on the upper end of it, it's €150,000 a year type salaries and salmon dinners.
Yeah. No, it's. I mean, I've got an Irish Times article up here. Like civil service grows by 50% in the last decade. That kind of just goes back into like the original kind of just the transitions that happened during that period, and in terms of like even NGO and kind of civil service people moving into like tech and all that kind of stuff, when those companies started to come here as well. That's another one that kind of links up. I mean, that's gone a bit more now that Musk took over Twitter, but yeah, that kind of like bureaucratic expansion really did kick off, like, and it was a major consequence, kind of, again, like, once you get kind of forward into 2011 onwards, because it's like, um, how do we deal with this kind of, or how do we deal with how we dealt with the economic implosion in those years, and it just ended up in more bureaucratic overreach.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the progressive mind. That's what it all is about. It's all about creating institutions to transform society. It's all about social transformation. And that's why I think it's a mistake often to call these people communists. I think in reality, I think what you're dealing with here is a much deeper kind of issue. It's the social transformation. Doesn't have to be communism. Capital is probably the most transformative thing in the world. And in our society, money calls the tune. And
Yeah.
so where the money flows, that's where the LGBT NGOs as a great example of a kind of a nest of NGOs that are related, that all popped up really, with the exception of maybe one or two, in the 90s and 2000s. And until Chuck Feeney basically pumped money into about a dozen of them, that's how we ended up with trans activism. That's how most of the gay marriage equality campaign came out of all that. The Zapone Gilligan case and everything. I mean, without that support institutionally, like those NGOs were just maybe one man operations, and they weren't profitable or anything. It was there was individual activists who were motivated, but they couldn't make a career out of it. And that's the problem, I suppose, with the kind of the fight back that we're kind of trying to grapple with, like, is that there's no way to give someone a career. There's no way to give someone a salary. I mean, there's no money in doing this at all. I mean, we do all
No.
this on our own back because we care. But it's the capital. They have the capital behind them, and so it's a mistake to say that it's communists. It's actually a much more integrated type of system. And so in the writing that I've been doing about William Petty and everything, you actually see that. You'll see communistic elements. You'll see managerial technocratic elements. The social transformation desire is there, and all in the 17th century. But it all really, the change in Ireland in the last 20 or 30 years really is the most radical, and it's all driven by capital. And so a lot of concepts from radical politics, like a lot of these guys like to LARP as, like, I'm against capitalism, but a lot of it, it's like with the human potential movement.
Yeah.
People say it's related to Eastern philosophies and everything, only superficially. In
Mm.
reality, you're dealing with the same kind of impulse that's very much an internal thing. It's not really brought in from outside. And so yeah, that's my take on it. It's a Western thing like that, that's connected to the rise of capital. And you see, Marxism isn't necessarily hostile to capital at all. It just views capitalism as a stage towards the kind of the future system that'll be, the people will own the means of production or whatever. Like, there's a lot of self deception with some of these guys. Like, they're working in the state. They're the beneficiaries of this kind of largesse, and yet they claim to be fighting the system, and that they transpose their guilt in collaborating with the system onto us, who make nothing from any of it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's exactly it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I'll just briefly pull back up that report, so we'll run through those last couple of things. But so yeah, one of the more interesting chapters was this chapter called Deglobalization, and in that, some interesting points, because basically this is the unwinding of the 90s liberal globalization paradigm, basically. So Ireland was the beneficiary of economic globalization in the 90s. It, opening markets, widening perspectives. This was seen, and it's become the religion of the country. This is what the real beliefs of the people who run this country really are. It actually can be reduced to this, you know. So it says here, deglobalization broadly refers to the decoupling of national and regional economies from each other, following decades of deeper integration across most of the world. Since the global financial crisis, now I thought this was amazing, because they're actually admitting here, which we'll read, that the global financial crisis, which I think is like the year zero for our problem today, right? This is where the post-Troika era, we have failed. The young people in Ireland have been totally betrayed by the ruling establishment. They basically shored up the economy to suit themselves, reinflated the economic housing bubble, and pursued mass immigration, basically, to try and keep this going. And they're admitting here that since the GFC, the term globalization has been used to describe the stagnating importance of international goods trade to the global economy, which could potentially be a precursor to some form of wider decoupling in the near future. However, the continued growth of international services, trade, and cross border investment suggests that other elements of globalization beyond the trade of physical products are continuing at pace. So they're talking basically about the financialization and these kinds of intangible economic activities, which we're really linked with. International supply chains have also become more complex, with production processes increasingly transcending national borders. Therefore, trends across the global economy over the last couple of decades do not necessarily indicate that any significant decoupling is imminent, but reflect structural changes which are occurring simultaneously. So yeah, they're talking about the pandemic. They're trying to face that there's going to be more barriers potentially. This could be to do with the U.S. trade with Trump and the tariffs and all this. But they are admitting quietly that the type of economic situation since the GFC is different. It's not like what came before, where you had some kind of tangible economic, uh, you know, process that kind of
Yeah.
fed other industries or other feeder industries, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the part there that, yeah, that's the other part that I read. I've impacts of deglobalization on the Irish economy.
Yeah, yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah. Did you want to call out something on
If you
that? Actually, at 8.2 there, it says the expansion of trade in the 90s and early 2000s, driven by the ICT revolution and production offshoring, was halted by the GFC. That's amazing, because
that's the point I wanted to make out. Yeah.
hit that,
That
yeah.
one. No. I mean, sorry. I mean, that's. I was just going to reference that point, but you just referenced it there. That one just really,
Yeah,
fucking blew my mind when I read it there. Yeah.
yeah, and it says ever since cross-border trade of physical goods has been sluggish relative to overall economic activity, and so they have a chart that shows that the relative decline of goods trading began before the recent stagnation for the whole EU, as rapid GDP growth outpaced the growth of physical goods. So GDP is outpacing physical exports and imports. So,
Yeah.
it's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, like it's more of a shift towards kind of like that, a sort of a servicey based, financialized,
Gig
economy,
economy,
gig economy. Yeah.
guys from God knows where on bikes delivering takeaways with sweaty food in the back.
Yeah.
There's so much of the tech economy is just this. It's just ways of, managing this kind of pimping, like where, oh, we have a roster of people that you can use an app to get to do something for you.
Mm.
You want to rent a building? Well, you don't go to an independent person who owns a building. You go to Airbnb or, WeWork or whatever it is, and they dominate that industry. So really, these tech companies are really kind of what's the word? Like monopolies. Basically, they're gatekeepers on the real economy, collecting a fee for your participation
Mm.
for something that otherwise would be an independent transaction that wouldn't be tied up to a company like that or an app that you now, and of course the app now you're going to be surveilled, you're going to be monitored, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then you can even kind of see down there total goods relative to GDP, share of total goods by trading partner. Yeah, I mean, you can kind of see it there, like that there has been a slight trend increase in the trend in terms of like, us kind of dealing with like the United States and whatnot, and yet, you know, a lot of Fine Gael's foreign policy prior to the election of Trump was like Simon Harris making TikTok clips of, saying Trump was a Gael and things like that.
Yeah.
It's like you're looking at that and you're going like, fucking hell,
Yeah,
like,
and you know actually that picks up here because when they actually summarize what they recommend, they actually are basically saying we have to keep in with America and we have to keep, so it says, finally, as a small open economy, Ireland is highly integrated into global value chains spanning the entire globe and has massively benefited from the expansion of international trade and investment. The country should aim to preserve its position by continuing to support a multilateral global order, facilitating cross border trade and investment and preventing a descent into protectionism. So, why on earth would the leader of the country say things like that about the leader of America in that context?
yeah,
When
yeah,
this is the plan, like this is the real plan, so it just shows you, like the likes of Harris and all, like he really is a very dim person. He has no real idea what he's doing. He's not even credible. Like all he has to do is just stick to this line, but he couldn't resist the opportunity to make a statement like that because he knows the shitlib media will eat it up.
yeah, and like the whole purpose of the tariffs is to basically, well, I mean, there's a few different parts of it. One is to kind of secure supply chains. One part of it is to, get tariff money in order to kind of service debt that especially wound around during COVID. But, another one was the fact that, like, one part of it was that they believed, Scott Bessent and Steve Mirren have kind of talked about this, that the dollar is too strong. And with the dollar too strong, it makes it harder for other I was going to say companies or other countries to basically pay off anything that they owe in dollars. So basically, the dollar needs to get weaker so that they can kind of service their debt. So in an environment like that, especially with Ireland being disproportionately represented in terms of like both trade with the US and even things like farmer, and Trump keeps going on about farmer. So you've got an export whereby like 60%, of Irish exports is like pharmaceuticals, and about 25 to 30% of that, I mean, a bit similar to the graph above, is going straight to the United States. I mean, it's just you,
Yeah.
you read this stuff and you get kind of exasperated, and you're like, you don't know what you're going to say next after that. It's just so crazy. But
Yeah, I mean, another thing then, obviously, that whole picture there is related to our EU membership, and they're saying, we have to stay in the EU, and they're predicting where the EU is going to go. So we don't think about this very often in recent years, but the EU is going to expand, and these countries that are going to come in are going to be genuinely poorer compared to the other countries because the everyone who joins the EU basically, you have to meet a certain standard, and Ireland was quite poor relatively when we joined, and so
yeah,
you get structural funds, and Greece was brought into the EU, should never have probably been brought in to the euro, especially, and that probably is the thing that really blew up the euro at that time in 2008. But
yeah,
but yeah, it seems that we're just going to get more of the same. So they're talking about, the fertility trends are identical. I mean, we got a lot of Eastern European immigration, but for example, it says here, it even confirms that, the EU tennis had fertility rates below their rate replacement. similar to the wider EU. Therefore, these populations are declining, which has been compounded by negative net migration trends since 2004, particularly for Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia. So these countries that we were poaching, cheap labor from for years, were actually in a position where they really needed their young people at that time.
Hmm.
And so this immigration obsession, like this is a totally out of date way of thinking about economics, in my opinion. And it's a measure of like the failure to kind of come up with different ideas and to face some of these problems in a different way.
Hmm.
Because you're not going to be able to find migrants from Europe anymore. That's what Britain finds now with Brexit. Like they can't even get European immigrants, so now they're basically just going to have Commonwealth immigrants. And then we
Yeah.
get them as well because of our connection to these corporations and everything, and the Commonwealth.
Yeah. And that's one thing as well. Like the way that like with the polls, I just kind of thought of that now. It's kind of an obvious one, but the way that the polls have like Nigel Farage kind of coming in next, and the Labour Party is just going to get wiped out.
Yeah,
I mean, if that happens, then I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing yet another spike in iPass,
yeah,
um, iPass people coming here, because one of the things that like I think you and Critique were talking about it last time. They kind of focus in more on the kind of like illegal immigration or the iPass stuff. Well, that would be kind of easy to kind of deal with, and where do those people go? Well, I mean, Holly Cairns Late Late Show. That's the attitude almost. It's like, oh God.
yeah.
But I can just see that, like, when you just read that out there, it's just like, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and I mean
that integrates in as well.
Turkey, they're claiming that migration from Turkey could join in about 20 years, basically. That's on
Mm.
schedule. And Turkey alone is a Muslim country, obviously,
Yeah,
connected to the broader Muslim world. It's like the conduit, to the rest of that region. It's like the regional power, the dominant country. It's like the Germany of that region.
yeah,
And Turkey, 600,000 people they're predicting would come to Europe. There's already a huge population of them in Germany, particularly, and that's because of America. Actually, it was America that put pressure on Germany after the war to take those populations.
mm,
So, I know with geopolitical things that's been pushed back a little bit because Erdogan is not in the good books now, the Anglo Americans or whatever, the people in Washington so much. But uh, the EU is desperate, and so the EU has a lot of the Europhiles are really caught up in this idea that if we need to grow our bloc, so we need to grow our way out of the problem, and
yeah,
so this will be very appealing. Like someone like Guy Verhofstadt, this to him, like he has written about how we need to connect Europe with Africa. We need to make these guys think in terms of just create a bigger block. Got a problem? Just create a bigger block. Create a bigger block, and they view it as a moral good. That this will create economic development and it'll get us out of this problem of stagnating growth. So this chart here kind of shows you this is like the overall picture of how they're kind of thinking. So they have long-term fiscal impact, negative and positive, and then you have level of control. So how much control you have over it on the left, going up and down, and then from from top to bottom, and then negative or positive impact. So digitalization could have a positive impact, and we have somewhat of a level of control over it. This is how they view it.
yeah,
Housing has a high level of control, and the long-term fiscal impact is not that negative. The green transition, this is going to have a long-term negative fiscal impact. They're aware of that, and but they do have control over it. Climate change impacts kind of not going to have that much control over it. Big impacts. So one of the biggest impacts is all this climate change stuff that isn't even going to work.
mm,
And the green transition is dedicated to that. So all of that is integrated. It's all massive cost. And yes, an oil-fired power station is far more efficient and would produce energy far more. I mean, not that would be the ideal, but in terms of producing energy dense, usable energy without having to have a huge reinvestment in infrastructure. And then, of course, there's these aging population, healthcare, aging population. This is the big negative cost alongside that. And they're saying that we have not that much level of control over it, and it's the biggest cost by far. And then you have, of course, deglobalization. So the effects of those economic changes which could happen, which are going to happen. In fact, they are going to happen to some extent. Deglobalization will definitely continue. And Ireland is probably positioned worse than any other country because of the reliance we have on the multinationals and on the immigration and everything to try and feed that. So that's the perfect storm. All that there. It's just absolute housing, healthcare, climate change, green transition, which is kind of a burden you're taking on top of housing and the immigration driven housing problem you have. So all these problems really, you could look at housing and say, well, that's a product of immigration. So you could have fixed that problem. We have affordable housing, but just dealing with immigration and saying we're not going to do that. Green transition is a kind of a vanity project, really, for people like the Greens and everything. And it's linked to sustainable development. We're tied in with that, the COP agreements and all that, and there's the EU agreements too. In fairness, like we are committed to reducing carbon. We're committed to reducing the national herd.
Yeah.
These are real commitments, and as we're doing that, we're increasing data centers. So you put all this together. Kids can't afford houses, can't have children. We're taking on this like metaphysical burden of like blaming ourselves because the climate is a bit warmer, and we're going to blow up our energy source for the digital economy, which we're relying on, which relies on high energy, having powerful energy sources. These data centers are terribly energy intensive. So yeah, it's a shit show.
Yeah, and on top of that, we've got a Taoiseach who just goes around calling the most powerful man in the world a Gael, and just feels kind of good about it. And that's your policy. That's how you look at all this stuff. And you're just kind of wondering, or looking around at this, going, "What the fuck?" Like, I mean, a whole infrastructure to deal with all this stuff. I mean, it isn't kind of faced into or kind of discussed or anything like that. I mean, like, I mean, we're probably kind of like long enough with the stream, but I mean, even stuff like pensions, you could talk about like investing or investment funds, or like, Norway, for example. I know they've obviously had a big kind of oil boost, but like they've had stuff like, index funds, and they've made like about $1 trillion or something like that because of like a proper investment structure that they kind of built all the way back in the 90s. I mean, we started a similar one about a year and a half ago, and there's like 2 billion in it. There's something like there's like 5 or 6 billion in it or something like that.
Yeah.
No kind of looking forward to that kind of stuff. Just these kind of,
I
line go up,
remember
line
in
go.
2008 and all onward, when Fine Gael came in 2011, I suppose it was. I remember Noonan like talking about how they were going to like raid the pension scheme.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they did. They did that,
Yeah,
to do this, to do this, so we could produce this amazing graph right here.
Goes down
So
and it
here we
goes up.
are, 2025, 116 in the labor force for every 100 workers. Mid-2060s, national debt reaches above 147% of GNI. Profit. I mean, what the fuck is this?
Yeah,
I mean, I know Trump is a meme. Like, I think he's useless, really. But like, there is something to be said for like the practical thinker who just doesn't have the kind of institutional dogma attached to them, who can come in and say, well, and look, I think a lot of what America is doing is probably not going to be very good at all long term, but at least Americans had a sense that something needed to change. The instinct was intact. When I look at Ireland, I don't see the instinct. Where's the institutional kind of people who are recognizing this and saying we actually need a radical change. We don't just need manage decline, because that's the option, the way I see it. We manage decline and we become replaced in our own country. We hand our children a fractured society, completely bankrupt, because we didn't want to take the steps. I mean, Cormac Lucy, someone says that in the chat. Yeah, that's a good example of an economist like who's saying these things. But where's the institutions? Where's the response?
Yeah, I mean, like just even back to your point there on like Trump. I mean, the tariff stuff. Whatever you think about that, and it's bad for Ireland in its own way. I mean, so in that kind of way, we should probably be opposed to it. But at the same time, like it's one of these kind of half batshit things that actually does seem to have worked. I mean, the dollar did devalue, and countries are paying America tariffs, right?
Yeah.
It did work to some degree, like like that kind of just level of kind of just take a decision kind of madness. I mean, there's a few kind of other parts and bits and pieces for that. I mean, I think, for example, like the Irish in general, like, and there's even a bit of kind of election data on this. Like, Irish people are very kind of, in terms of like voting patterns and whatnot, very kind of stable. Kind of conservative and
Mm.
whatnot, and that's a really good thing to have in certain circumstances. But now it's like, you know,
Something has to give.
something has to give and something has to change. Like, I
I
mean,
mean, if that was presented to people, if you just had someone like within Fianna Fáil who came forward and said, "We're looking at this new trajectory we're on, and this is now irrefutable. This is a well-researched, group of these are serious people, like they're in the institutions, and they're saying this now. They're saying it in a way which is very, uh, like they're leaving out particular things like the fact that this was all manufactured. But some of the demographic stuff you can't do much about. The population will just decline a little bit, and I'm
yeah,
okay with that. Like, I'm okay with not having as nice a standard of living if it means that the country remains Irish, And I think if people had that explained to them, they'd probably go, that's probably right, you know. But it's just that it's because the authority figures aren't explaining this to people in this way. This is presented as normal. It's totally normal for managed decline. I mean, what kind of future is that? I mean, why should anyone settle for that kind of future? Managed decline is the best we can do.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's no kind of energy or spontaneity or kind of, you know, excitement behind it. And the only kind of people, or the only kind of segment which are trying to kind of push this forward, are kind of, just a random person on kind of X or Twitter or whatever, like,
Yeah.
um
Yeah, I
and
mean,
it's
David McWilliams has been making the right noises. I mean, he's not the worst, I know. I find him a bit annoying in some ways, but because he does kind of take things that people have said a long time ago and kind of say, "Oh, now I'm saying it," and it's like, well, people came there before you. But
yeah, y-
but I think he
yeah,
has
but
to. I think he's smart enough to realize, okay, I have to get ahead of this because this is now. You see, we're actually entering into this paradigm now because the demographic situation is going to be so bad. You can see here, like by 2030s, GNI per capita growth declines below 1% and continues to drop. So you're not even going to get the GDP, and the GNI is not going to be. The GDP might be up, but the GNI is a better metric, like, and that's just not going to be competitive. And Europe is going to have the same problem. So this is a time where we need to actually think internally about who we are. We need to actually rekindle the fire, basically, in Europe. We need to think like, what has been this relationship with America for so long? Like, they literally blew up our energy infrastructure, created a war
mm,
on our border,
and
and
yeah, and are
well, you could
basically
debate about that, of course, but
yeah, and are basically telling us, yeah, you have to pay, like, tariffs to us
yeah.
to service our own debt, or or else. Yeah, I mean,
And
like,
they're prepping for war with Russia in Ireland here. This is what the kind of derricks are amplified by. We're getting ready to go to war with Russia at this time. And,
mm,
and they'll say like, oh, Russia's in decline. You know, Russia's in decline and their population is decreasing. Yes, so is yours. So is yours. Except you've been stupid enough to bring in all these people who have no loyalty to you whatsoever.
mm.
It's
At,
just, yeah.
Yeah, at least with their kind of Russian stuff, like, I mean, I saw a clip on Virgin Media a couple of days ago talking about like the government were actually thinking of, like, you know, bringing in a referendum about the triple lock, but now that Connolly got elected, they think it would fail. So, that's one good thing that's going to come out of that, I suppose. But
Mm.
yeah, I'm just taking a look at that graph, just the way it just bounces down and then it
It's
gets back up.
magnetic, isn't it? You can't stop looking at it. Like, it's just dread looking at that.
Yeah, even the fact, even the color of it, like that, it starts off green and it gets gradually more red. So you're just kind of going, okay, so it is really going to go like that.
Yeah, and see, it's every metric. Economic conditions in orange, they're declining. GNI drops below 1%, and then expenditure trends. All expenditure reaches double 2025 costs by the 2050s. 25 years time. I mean, that's like the year 2000. Looking back now, that's not that long ago. Like we were around, we were young at that point, but like I remember that, and I mean,
Yeah, and like that growth rate of like, um 0.5%. I mean, like, depending on what inflation is going to be like on that, yeah, like exactly like you said, like, you're you're just massively like uncompetitive already on that.
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, fucking
I mean,
hell.
a lot of it is, I think, is that people can't face reality. Really, this isn't real to people. I think that's kind of been the post-war boomer type thing. Is that things were so good, and they had. I'm not saying I don't like the intergenerational warfare of just always blaming boomers either, but there is a paradigm here that has changed radically, basically, and it pivots on the global financial crisis. I think if you go the post-war kind of boomers, yeah, there was obviously problems and there's problems in every generation, but you had increasing buying power over their lives, basically. Their housing increased in value, so that when they had a home, it increased in value. That became a huge store of wealth for them, and they were able to accumulate. A lot of them had decent jobs in the public service and all like that, and you got decent pensions and everything. That kind of stability is gone now.
Hmm.
Most people just don't get that. Like, so you have the post, I call it the post Troika or whatever GFC generation. That is the defining moment where things could have gone a different direction, in my opinion. You could have basically had a quiet, what would you call it? Like, it would have been a libertarian revolution of sorts, where you would have gone in and basically said, government created this, they're responsible. These particular people in the banks and whatever else, these guys are genuinely responsible, and they actually need to be gotten rid of, like physically gotten rid of,
Hmm.
out of the institutions. Not any serious in that now, but just needs to be gotten rid of in a polite way, like, and there
Yeah.
needs to be a new trajectory established. But instead, the young people got exported to Australia. The immigration ramped up in the mid 2000s, and here we are now looking down this ski slope of just absolute fucking decline.
Yeah, I mean, like just thinking back on it, like the two, certainly in my lifetime anyway, the two major events have been the financial crisis and then the COVID lockdowns and whatnot. And when I was like doing all those streams about like Hardy Bucks and Love Hate, like you can even see it in those
Yeah,
shows. Like, I mean, Hardy Bucks it's a great show and whatnot, but like it's actually really dark in its own way. Like a bunch of guys with just nothing to do and like their you know mid 20s, early 30s. Like that wouldn't have worked 10 years before that.
no,
Like that's the kind of when you kind of see like just art or music kind of doing that stuff, they're almost kind of the first people to get there in a sense, and that's almost kind of your wake up call. Maybe that sounds kind of really pretentious or whatever, but like um it's just like it really was a turning point. And the other thing as well with that is I think kind of just kind of with millennials and whatnot, we kind of remember that kind of older stuff
yeah,
when the country was actually normal or somewhat normal. And kind of younger people like zoomers or whatever, they don't at all. And
mm,
it's very, very interesting to kind of see the impact that that has, I think, on younger people. And I think one of the things people have talked about is this disparity in terms of political view or opinion between younger people. Like, that the younger zoomers are more nationalistic than average, and there's a part of them which are more kind of like social democrat leftist on average. And I wonder, does that kind of have anything to play into this? Because like, because I'm just trying to conceptualize it from my own end. Like, because again, a lot of people here in the chat, like we remember when the country was a lot more normal than it was now, and it does
yeah.
seem to
I
me in a
mean,
lot of ways
we
that it.
remember when you could literally rent an apartment with a few lads for €60 a week, even
Yeah,
less in a rural area. You know,
Yeah,
I mean,
I
you
mean,
could go out, you could go drinking, you can meet women, you have a social life. Now, you could find a job in a pub really handy. You could find a job delivering takeaway or whatever it is, you know. And you think about the difference in society now, like, you know, all the delivery thing, that's kind of a, you're dealing with ethnic mafias. If you want to work in the services industry, I saw that happening when I did work in the pub for a while back when I was younger. And I
mm,
mean, I saw that, like, the immigration thing really affected that. Like, so the whole dynamic, you know, can change. And so you're dealing with ethnic mafias, and my friends will get the job, and you know they're not going to hire you, and the wages won't go up then because there's this pressure due to immigration and everything. Uh, and so, and you know, I see young people just don't socialize, and that's proven. Like data shows this: the young people are socializing less, and they're going out more less. And they haven't got any spending money. So the way you had a youth culture in the '60s, like the boomers had the kind of the first real youth culture, and society was so warped by it that we still actually are feeling the effects like of boomer culture. Like I like the Stones too. You know, the Stones are still touring 50 or 60 years later. And, you know, but yet the young people now don't have the kind of spending money. They don't have the kind of freedom, you know, buying a car. You know, you could buy a car for €500, tax it for a couple of €100, and insure it for maybe 1,000 or 15, depending on if you had, you know, some insurance situation. That was all possible. That was possible. Normal fellas had cars.
yeah,
Normal fellas. I often drove across the country with lads, you know, went for drinking or whatever, down to Galway, down wherever, Cork, whatever, go to Dublin, sleep in a car. These kinds of things now are not as viable, you know, and that's to me something is lost there. All of that socializing, all of that, all of those stories you have, war stories, you know.
yeah, yeah. Like, I mean, just and even kind of thinking back, like you were kind of referencing the boomer example. I remember back in the 70s, they had a kind of a backlog of driver licenses. So they basically did this thing called cowboy licenses, and they just gave it out
I
to
know
a
people like
bunch of
this.
random.
I know
Yeah, yeah.
the guys with
There were,
Arctic lorry licenses who never got into a lorry in their life. You know.
yeah, and they just gave out licenses, driving licenses, left, right, and center in the 70s, and it's just like, yeah, whatever. Now, I mean,
Yeah,
like obviously, you maybe don't want people
and now you
who are
look at a
bad
young
drivers
person trying to
driving.
get a car. Right, wait, okay, you have to spend a couple of €100 on driving lessons first. You have to go do a theory test. You have to pay more for insurance. Actually, you probably won't even get insured, to be honest, in a lot of places. Uh, it's just totally different. You know,
Yeah,
all this is a form of intergenerational vampirism. Like these things, these experiences mean something, you know. And I feel really sorry for young people, to be honest. I think they're getting a really shit deal, and it kills me that so many of them are fooled by these left wing idiots, you know, promising them that, well, you know, we can make it work. You know, immigration is good, and these are just far. These guys are trying to stir you up. You know, I'm trying to save you from having your life destroyed by these people, you know?
yeah. I mean, just on my end, just like I know we've kind of talked about a lot of maybe not the happiest topics to say the least, but I've tried to anyway just talk about maybe potential things to look at or ideas to look at, or I mean, obviously, like on my end, I'm just a small micro guy and whatnot, but like just putting the idea out there that like Ireland's energy matters, and you know nuclear or you know
Yeah, probably not a good idea to do a
offering.
nuclear war now, you know?
Well, okay, no, I mean like nuclear plants and whatnot, or just like getting licenses to
Oh, yeah.
drill. These are ideas that should be just looked at. I mean that's it really, like because the
Yeah.
alternative is just like exactly like you've said here. It's like manage decline.
Yeah, managed decline, and there's a couple of categories. You have the Derricks, who are kind of the pro NATO, you know, obsessed with Putler, you know, and their eye is not on this ball. Like, so all they can see is like the GDP has to go up, the data has to be pumped, you know, we have to be a Silicon Republic. Like this is a out of date paradigm now. Whatever benefits were accrued from that paradigm are gone. And the world we're moving to now and in is just totally different. and they
Yeah.
can't think of it. And then you have the social democrat type, radical progressive type, who are the product of education basically, and they can't think outside of it either because they think you can just bring everyone here, and so we need to try and crystallize the kind of nationalists, the kind of conservative types, the kind of, well, the general just independent people who kind of recognize that I'm not represented in any of this. Like, where's my future in this?
Yeah.
I'm supposed to die some point in the 2060s, give my house to the Fair Deal scheme. Some Indian will get it probably. I'll be in a nursing home if I'm lucky, being looked after by fellas from God knows where, and we know where that goes.
Yeah.
What kind of future is that? Like, you desperately need paradigm change here. Desperately.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I agree with all that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, look, I mean, we've probably covered it, have we? I think we did a fair bit of time there.
Yeah, we're coming up to fucking hell. Are we coming up to nearly 3 hours?
Must be, yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Oh Christ. Okay. Cool. Good stuff.
Yeah. Well, I'll just if anyone wants to follow Last True Gael, I have your Twitter, your Telegram, and your YouTube channel. Is that all you want to plug?
Yeah, that's all I have. Yeah, sound.
Yeah. And you can follow me on Substack and all those links there. I would appreciate if people would subscribe over on Odyssey and Rumble. I'm trying to get Rumble streaming going. I think I can get Odyssey going pretty easy. I was afraid to do it tonight with all the technical problems in case I crashed the stream. But the plan is I will do a few of these streams on a fairly regular basis anyway. Maybe I'll get some other guests too, have some different ideas. And I'll be doing, obviously, the Globalist Education series. Thanks, everyone, for coming out and staying with us here for the 3 hours nearly. We'll talk to you soon. Take care. Thanks for listening.